1530 AD, 54:24 AM. On June 25th, the Confession of Augsburg was conducted, which officially began the Protestant Reformation of Christianity in Germany, a literal revolt against the Roman Church authority. This date is 153 times 10, and 153 is the geometrical value for sons of God, a sum long associated with early Christianity. Almost immediately the Roman Church retaliated, and many years of intrigues and violence ensued. The Muslim Quran was published using the printing press in Venice, Italy, even before any copies of the Quran were published in an Islamic country. This was the year 1260 of the Christian Coptic calendar. 1. Planet in rebellion. 2. The discoverers. 1531 AD, 54:25 AM. The Spanish conquistador Pizarro arrived in South America among the Inca or Quiche, a people who reacted to the presence of white men with the same dread that the Aztecs experienced. Inca King Huáscar of Peru related an ancient prophecy of the coming of white men, which his own father told him, a prediction passed down for generations that foretold that in the reign of the 13th Inca, white men of strength surpassing their own would come from the east and hold dominion over them. A variant of this tradition was the prophecy of Chilam Balam, known throughout the Yucatan at this time, which foretold, quote, "At the end of the 13th age, when the Inca was at the height of power, the signal of God would appear in the heavens, and the cross with which the world was enlightened will be manifested. There will be variance of men's will in future times, when this signal shall be brought. Receive your bearded barbarian guests from the east," unquote. This is no doubt a corrupted Christianized version rewritten by the Spanish, but the signal of God in the skies is a comet. The coming of white men was intriguing to the Inca, for they recalled vividly the tales of their forefathers that claimed that the megalithic architecture in South America, quote, were the work of white auburn-haired men, unquote, who had lived thousands of years priorly. These may have been Phoenicians or Iberians. This same race of white-bearded men created a vast network of stone roads that the Inca maintained for a long time. The arrival of the Spanish was not peaceful, for even the Spanish chroniclers wrote that the conquistadors raped over 5,000 Inca women. The signal of God the Inca witnessed was perceived to be Halley's Comet, which was seen in this year. Nostradamus witnessed Halley's Comet, known then as the Great Comet, and also recorded by Appian. A quake at Lisbon, Portugal, killed 30,000. 1531 is the year found upon the Orontius Phineus map, which clearly shows Antarctica with running rivers and ice free. 1. Atlantis in America, Spence. 3. Fingerprints of the Gods. 4. Secret Places of the Lion. 5. Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries of South America. 6. Nostradamus, A Life and Myth. 7. Introduction to Comets. 1532 AD, 54:26 AM. The Inca Huáscar is overthrown by Atahualpa, who then becomes the Inca of the Quechua people of South America in Peru. Atahualpa is considered an illegitimate son, and his seat was at Cuzco. Francisco Pizarro imprisoned Atahualpa and ransomed him back to the people for the gold and silver all around them, the requirement being that he be able to fill a certain chamber with it. The locals complied, stripping their facades and temples. Peru was the ancient Old Testament land of Ophir, Peru, where the scriptures claimed was located a lot of gold. In custody, Atahualpa learned how to play chess and speak Spanish, and the officers under Pizarro were enraged when Pizarro went back on his word to the people and strangled Atahualpa to death after he received the requested chamber of gold and silver. Pedro de Chiesa de Leon in his chronicles wrote that the megalithic city of Tiwanaku in the Andes Mountains of Peru, destroyed 1687 BC, had great doors of immense stone amazingly wrought, for the doorway with their jambs, lintels and thresholds were of a single stone. He expressed his amazement and failed to understand how this was possible. This is exactly what the archaeologist Porter found in the colossal remains of architecture at Bashan, the land of the Old Testament giants called the Rephaim, Huge doors all made out of a single stone, jambs, lintels and thresholds all together. At Tiwanaku were excavated statues of men with 6 fingers on their hands and 6 toes on their feet. In the Old Testament, the story of Goliath has one of his sons with 6 fingers and toes on each limb as well. Actual humanoid skeletons with 6 fingers and toes have been found. C. 1891 AD. A comet is seen over Europe which oddly is said not to have been Halley's, which was the one that appeared in 1531. However, the 1531 date disrupts the perfect orbit, while 1532 is closer to Halley's recorded periodicity. 1056 years after the fall of Rome was the fall of Peru to the Spanish. 1. The Lost Realms, Sitchin. 2. Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries of South America. 1533 AD, 54:27 AM. European records tell of a bright comet in this year. It was observed by Copernicus. Ivan IV is born, later to become Ivan the Terrible, a Russian Tsar who idolised Vlad the Impaler. 1. Prophets of Doom. 2. Introduction to Comets. 1534 AD, 54:28 AM. King Henry VIII of England passed the Act of Supremacy, which made the King of England the head of the English Church instead of the papacy in Rome. He began closing monasteries and confiscating church property, inadvertently giving rise to Protestantism in England, though this was not his intent. Nostradamus predicted an outbreak of the plague, but his teachers, resenting his rising popularity for his successful cures and outspoken unorthodox theories, resented his acumen and were in essence his worst opposers. But the plague did return, and in the exact year he predicted it. Nostradamus further foretold that a bright light would appear in the heavens in 1572, and accordingly in 1572 a nova startled the world with its magnificence for months. He described and dated the Great Fire of London in 1666, and accurately described modern tanks, planes, submarines, aerial combat, time bombs, the emergence of Western nations across the sea, America, and its war against the East, as well as radio, television, sea vessels made of iron, unheard of in his day, and even declared that sometime after 1997 AD, a great prophet will arise in Christendom, a new priest who will reform and revitalise the entire structure of the Christian faith. He compiled a chronology of Earth history that deduced the period from Adam to Jesus to be 3962 years. This is only 35 years off the mark, counting from Adam's banishment in 3895 BC, 1 Annus Mundi, to the year of the crucifixion event in 33 AD. He also deduced that from Noah to Abraham was 1080 years, and amazingly, from Noah's 13th year alive to Abraham's death was 1080 years, 2826 till 1772 BC. In this year, Ignatius Loyola founded the Society of Jesus, Jesuits, agents of the Roman Catholic Church. The fall of Roman Church power in England was exactly 480 years after the division of the Roman Church in 1054 AD. 1. History of Civilization, Volume 1. 2. Sages and Seers. 3. Secrets of Nostradamus. 1536 AD, 54:30 AM. John Calvin published his Institutes of the Christian Religion, the first Protestant textbook. He is most famous for his belief in predestination, that the future redemption of the elect was already set long before the past was begun. 1. The Discoverers. 1538 AD, 54:32 AM. Nostradamus was witness to the overnight creation of a volcanic mountain in Naples. 1. Secrets of Nostradamus. 1539 AD, 54:33 AM. The King of England's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, commissioned an English translation of the scriptures called the Great Bible, 1 History in Quotations. 1540 AD, 54:34 AM. The Jews are expelled from Italy. Also in Italy, Pope Paul III formally authorised the existence of the Jesuits. Peter Appian, in his Astronomicon Caesarium, published in this year, remarked that comet tails always point away from the sun. He had studied the comet of 1531. Spanish miners searching for silver and gold traces near Callao, Peru, removed earth in a deep mine shaft and were surprised to discover an entombed wooden ship of extreme antiquity, unlike any they were familiar with. For other unusual discoveries of ships underground, see 1503 and 1460 AD. 1. Jewish supremacism. 2. Mysteries and magic. 3. Introduction to comets. 4. Secret cities of old South America. 1541 AD, 5435 AM. Mercator built a map of the world in the form of a globe, the most accurate of its kind at the time. 1542 AD, 5436 AM. Pope Paul III revived the Inquisition, calling it the Congregation of the Inquisition, or Roman Inquisition, with the chief aim to crush the spirit and spread of Protestantism in Italy. Portuguese explorers reached Japan by sailing around Africa and on through the Arabian and Indian seas, and around China through Indonesia for the first time. England joins the horrible practice of burning witches, the brutal torture and killing of women. This was predicted by Mother Shipton, Ursula Southill, born 1488. In the 194 years of English insanity, they would burn to death about 30,000 females. This was much less than those burned on the continent. This was the 476th year since the Norman invasion and takeover of England. 1. March of the Titans. 2. Christ the Power and the Passion. 1453 AD. 5437 AM. Nicholas Copernicus published his Concerning the Revolution of the Heavenly Bodies, wherein he attacked the church-propagated belief in the geocentric universe. In his heliocentric system, he provided evidence that Earth was not the centre of creation, or the centre of the solar system, but just another planet orbiting a star. A Catholic priest himself, he had refused to publicise his findings because of the oppressive censorship of the Church, fearing retribution through the Inquisition. The forced ignorance was ridiculous and damaging, Aristarchus having 18 centuries earlier already proposed that Earth moved around the Sun. 1. A History of Civilization, Volume 1. 1546 AD, 5440 AM. A gigantic asteroid or comet body passed through the inner system and crossed over the ecliptic after 52 years beneath the ecliptic. It spent 40 years north of the ecliptic plane, completing its 92-year orbit. This is exactly 500 years before this object collided into the North American continent. 1547 AD, 5441 AM. Ivan IV, Vasilievich the Terrible, crowned as Russia's first Tsar, age 17. Ivan the Terrible idolised Vlad the Impaler and emulated him by having enemies and political dissidents impaled. He invented cruel tortures and he nailed the hats on the heads of foreign emissaries. 1551 AD, 5445 AM. Sweating sickness returned to London, England, and then quickly dies out. It has not returned as of 2012 AD. 1554 AD, 5448 AM. Pope Julius III ordered that the Jewish Talmud be burned everywhere. Solomon Romano burnt many thousands of Hebrew scrolls for the Inquisition. In England, the Catholic Queen Mary, later called Bloody Mary, announced that she would soon begin cleansing England of heretics. She meant Protestants. In 1555, she would indeed try just this. This year was 1,000 years after the founding of the imperial restoration of the Roman Empire by Justinian in 554 AD, and exactly 500 years after the division of the Roman Church in 1054 AD. A comet appeared over Europe, inspiring fear and awe. Further, the crescent moon ejected a bright arrow of flame into the night sky. In 1554, Gerardus Mercator published his Great Map of Europe, correcting many of the cartographic mistakes of his predecessors. Mercator's research included not merely the size, shape, and distribution of the Earth's landmasses, but also its history. Mercator amassed a tremendous amount of historical data and compiled a history of the world using the astronomical records of civilizations spanning back to distant antiquity. a chronology linking different dating systems and methods of the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans and others. Mercator's great map of Europe actually exhibited those geographical areas that were then in 1554 occupied by the descendants of the migrating Israelites, this being exactly 3,000 years after the exodus of Israel from Egypt in 1447 BC, also preceded by a comet, and 2484 years, 414 times 6, after Israel became a nation independent of Judah in 931 BC. Interestingly, the Israelites in Egypt lived at Goshen, the region surrounding the Great Pyramid complex and Sphinx, the Great Pyramid being the pre-flood world's prime meridian, or 0-degree longitude-latitude. Because of an archaic global pole shift cataclysm, the Giza complex now lies on 30 degrees north latitude above the equator. Mercator's map was published exactly 552 years before Armageddon, a phoenix cycle, 4 orbits of Phoenix. Not only is the number 552 encoded in the chronometry of the Great Pyramid, see chronotecture, very prominently by Nostradamus, who was aware of phoenix cycles and was cognizant that Phoenix would destroy the entire Western world, see 2040 AD. In fact, Nostradamus had so much to say concerning the destruction of the world by Phoenix that this author wrote Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse to demonstrate it. In April of 1554, the secretary of Nostradamus, a Jean-Aimé de Chevigny, began transcribing the prophecies of Nostradamus as the French Jewish prophet directed him. This collection was called The Centuries, and it fully details the major depopulations of the world in disasters in the exact years 2040 and 2046. 1554 AD is the Annus Mundi year 5448, which is parallel to the exact pyramid inch height of the Great Pyramid today, which lacks a capstone. The chief cornerstone is not present and will not return to Earth until Armageddon in 552 years from 1554. Once a capstone is in place, the height of the pyramid will be 5814 inches, as seen in Chronicon 1 under the year 2815 BC, 1080 AM. The height of the Great Pyramid at 5448 parallels the geometrical value in Hebrew for the statement in the book of Isaiah that perfectly describes the Great Pyramid, Isaiah 19:19-20. The monument once exhibited millions of tiny inscriptions on its outer white limestone casing blocks that contained the wisdom and knowledges of the ancients before the flood, the histories and prophecies of future Earth. Interestingly, in this same year, Conrad Gesner finished his monumental work Bibliotheca Universalis, 4 huge volumes, like the 4 faces of the pyramid, which contained a catalogue of all the writings that had ever been compiled, in Hebrew, Latin and Greek, listing over 1,800 authors and the titles of their works, even providing summaries of the texts. For this epic achievement, Genser was called the father of bibliography. In 1554, a method for extracting silver from medium-grade ores was perfected in Mexico. Later, in 1563, Gerardus Mercator would visit the Great Pyramid and even write the date of his visit on the ancient stone structure. 1. Jewish supremacism. 2. The Bible fraud. 3. The secrets of Nostradamus. 4. The discoverers. 8. Pirates' terror on the high seas. 1555 AD, 5449 AM. Catholic Queen Mary has over 300 Protestants burned at the stake as heretics in London, a largely unpopular move. Gunpowder was put in the fire so the victims would quickly die. Cardinal Pole affirmed in Parliament that Britain was the first of all nations to receive the Christian faith, an assertion made by others before like Virgil and Polydor. Pope Paul IV condemned Jewish usury and anti-Christian activities. An astrologer named Goricus warned King Henry II, who was then 37, to beware of death in his 42nd year, during the summer. Nostradamus would later warn the king of the same thing. 1. The Mask of Nostradamus. 2. St. Paul in Britain. 3. Jewish supremacism. 1556 AD, 5450 AM. On January the 23rd, over 800,000 people perished in China by an earthquake at the Shenxi province, principally in Shaanxi. Some estimates place the death toll at 830,000. A comet was recorded by Europeans in April. This is exactly 70 by 7 years before 2046 AD, when millions in China will die from earthquakes throughout all of Asia. 1. Natural disasters. 2. Introduction to comets. 1558 AD, 54:52 AM. A descendant of the Zeno brothers named Ruskeli found among the family papers the Zeno map, dated at 1380, that depicted an ice-free Greenland and certain polar regions. He had the map published in this year. This date is connected calendrically to the Great Dispersion of Humanity in 1899 BC, the Babel event 3456 years previously, or 864 times 4. As shown abundantly in Chronicon 1, 864 is the number that links both space and time, c. 3031 BC. In 1899 BC, the families of the world spread out rapidly after a disaster and collapse of empire in the Middle East. As traditions concerning that period affirm, many expeditions had been set out previously to map the world and its coasts. Also in 1558, the military tank was invented, exactly 138 years, 1656 months, after the armoured wagon. 1. Cataclysm. 1559 AD, 54:53 AM. Pope Paul IV published his Index of Forbidden Books. Every Hebrew book in the city of Prague was confiscated and burned. On July the 10th, King Henry II of France died an agonising death, predicted by Nostradamus and Goricus. A splintered lance pierced his visor and eye in a ceremonial joust. The French Jewish prophet had specifically warned Queen Catherine de' Medici, but she could not dissuade him from the event. The night that killed King Henry fled, but was captured, and Catherine tortured him to death. She was the mother of Mary, Queen of Scots. 1. The Bible fraud. 1560 AD, 54:54 AM. Ivan IV of Russia becomes Ivan the Terrible at the death of his wife, the beautiful Anastasia Romanovna, who had won a national competition of virgins to win his attention. In this year was born Erzsébet Báthory of Hungary, popularly known as the infamous Elizabeth of Bathory, Transylvania. Romania, born 84 years after the death of Vlad the Impaler. She is infamous for butchering over 600 young girls and women, so as to bathe in their blood in her belief that this was cosmetic and prolonged her youth. She was known as the Blood Countess, and was influenced by the still-told stories of Vlad Dracul. She died in 1614, exactly 138 years after Dracula. 1. Mad Kings and Queens. 1561 AD, 54:55 AM. A great mass of objects passed over the sun and filled the skies as seen from Nuremberg, Germany. Some smaller objects struck the ground and gave off a smoke, and the greatest object seen was a gigantic black spear-shaped thing hulking beyond the earth. The northern prophetess Mother Shipton, born Ursula Southill, died. She prophesied of the last days with amazing accuracy, predicting 2 global destructions that will depopulate the entire world, 2040 and 2046 AD. Nostradamus, who also predicted these 2 major global cataclysms for the years 2040 and 2046, was 58 years old at her death. In this year was born Sir Francis Bacon on January the 22nd, died 1627. He was a brilliant writer, orator, historian, theologian, mystic and poet, an author of these works attributed to William Shakespeare. He also edited the King James Version of the Bible. Bacon was actually born Francis Tudor, Prince of Wales, the legitimate heir to the throne of England, the offspring of a secret love affair between Queen Elizabeth and Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. Dudley was later poisoned to death, and Francis' identity was not made known to him until late in his life. He was raised by Nicolaus Bacon, keeper of the Great Seal of Britain, Sir Francis Bacon was probably the greatest king England never had. One of Heaven and Earth, intro edited by Sitchin. 1562 AD, 5456 AM. At Izamel in the Yucatan, De Landa under Vatican authority attempted to destroy all of the Mayan codices. In July, he burned 27 of the Mayan books, a tremendous accumulation of Mayan knowledge lost. This is evidenced by the fact that the 4 surviving Mayan codices are all packed with information. This year was 800 years after the Council of the Mayan Astronomers, Timekeepers, in 762 AD. In this year also from South America, Peru, Spanish explorers sent back to Spain a cache of fascinating figurines of dinosaurs fighting each other, fighting against armed men, of what appeared to be advanced scientific experimentation using magnifying glasses and telescopes, even performing surgery. The dinosaur carvings were of anatomically correct Stegosaurus, Brontosaurus and pterodactyls. Many of these figurines are still exhibited in the Inca Museum of Peru. Interestingly, this was the 5,000th year since the descent of the Anunnaki called Watchers in 3439 BC, who taught mankind these sciences before the Great Deluge, see Chronicon 1. Lost Cities and Ancient Mysteries of South America. 1563 AD, 5457 AM. Gerardus Mercator visited Egypt and the Great Pyramid and wrote the date 1563 next to his name on the monument. The Great Pyramid was the 0-degree longitudinal point for the antediluvian world, and Mercator developed a modern late longitudinal system. 1. The Great Pyramids, Cortigiani, 1566 AD, 5460 AM. In Nostradamus' letter to his son Caesar, translated by Carlo Patrian, says that various volumes that had been hidden for centuries were revealed to him, old Hebrew books of prophecy. At age 63, Nostradamus died. Strange lights were seen over Basel. Some of these appeared as blackish globes, passing visibly over the bright sun, according to Samuel Coccius. 1. Nostradamus, the Lost Manuscript. 2. Secrets of Nostradamus. 3. Of Heaven and Earth. 1568 AD, 5462 AM. Gerardus Mercator published his Mercator's Chronology. After 14 years of intense research, he began in 1554, a 450-page tome containing a timeline of world history based off of astronomical calculations. 1569 AD, 5463 AM. Mercator published his famous map of the world using the Mercator projection, exhibiting vertical and horizontal longitudinal and latitudinal lines. Pope Pius V expelled the Jews from the Papal States. 1. Jewish supremacism. 1570 AD, 5464 AM. Ivan the Terrible of Russia had the 60,000 people of the city of Novgorod tortured and executed. The victims were impaled, fried alive in gigantic skillets, and roasted alive on spits. The massacre took an entire week. 1. Mad Kings and Queens. 1571 AD, 5465 AM. In October, a bright burning streak appeared in the sky, as seen from Europe for a long time. It was a huge pillar of fire regarded as a good omen to the combined naval fleets of Spain, Venice and the Roman Papal States, on their way to battle the Turks. In the naval battle of Lepanto, the European Christians defeated the Turks. Immediately following the battle, the people of Venice retaliated against the local Jews and expelled them from the city. Even at this date, the Europeans were still hosting Jewish communities that acted as spies against them for the Muslims. Johann Kepler is born, died 1630, famous astronomer and scientist who summed up his life research of astronomical geometry with the statement, quote, "The Earth's orbit is the measure of all things," unquote. 1. Of Heaven and Earth. 2. History in quotations. 3. The Discoverers. 1572 AD, 5466 AM. A supernova appeared and illuminated the night sky from the Cassiopeia star group. that remained visible for 16 months into 1573. It was visible in the daytime and caused much alarm throughout Europe. The nova had been predicted by Nostradamus. On August the 24th, the Roman Catholic prelates and priests pressured the King of France to commit a horrible crime. At the stroke of midnight, as the bell tolled throughout the city, Catholics and agents of the Roman Church dragged Protestants from their beds and slaughtered them, killing 60,000 people. This was at Paris, France, and was ever known as the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. The king and those who participated were rewarded by the Pope, Gregory XIII. 1. Secrets of Nostradamus. 2. Planet in Rebellion. 1577 AD, 5471 AM. Near Reden, Switzerland, a very ancient and decayed oak tree fell and revealed a cave wherein was excavated the bones of a truly gigantic man, a giant that would have stood 16 feet in height. A well-known physician, Felix Plater of Basel, studied the anatomical remains, refashioned them and presented them to the Senate of Lucerne. Afterward, the giant skeleton was immortalised upon the coat of arms for the town of Lucerne and was painted by Johann Bock. A bright comet appeared over Europe. A couple of months later, in December, black objects were viewed in the sky over Wittenberg, Germany, near Altorf. 1. Secret cities of old South America. 2. Secret symbols on the dollar bill. Introduction to comets. 3. Of heaven and earth. Sitchin. 1578 AD, 5472 AM. Workmen in a vineyard at Rome accidentally discovered the famous catacombs of Rome after a collapse. Vast tunnels and galleries of rock filled with Greek and Latin inscriptions, crypt complexes and cemeteries used by the 1st and 2nd century Christians and other outcasts. 1579 AD, 5473 AM. Sir Francis Drake of England sailed into the San Francisco Bay and claimed it for Britain. 1580 AD, 5474 AM. Sir Francis Drake completes his voyage around the world, but the British government kept the matter a secret for 10 years. A comet is recorded by Europeans in September. 1. Introduction to comets. 1581 AD, 5475 AM. Pope Gregory XIII wrote, quote, "Moved by an intense hatred of the memory of Christ, they, the Jews, continue to plan horrible crimes against the Christian religion with daily increasing audacity." Unquote. 1. Jewish supremacism. 1582 AD, 5476 AM. Pope Gregory XIII had the Anno Domini calendar modified by making October 5th to become October 15th, eliminating 10 days from the calendar that were necessary to recalibrate the calendar with the seasons. The Gregorian calendar is still in essence the Julian one, save for the elimination of leap days every 4 years. January the 1st is declared to be the beginning of the year, but this is nothing really changed, for the ancient Roman religious year began at January the 1st. The Western world's New Year's Day, as January the 1st, is different than the East and that of ancient Israel, which held the vernal equinox as the start of a new year in the days of Moses. This calendrical change was 1056 years after the creation of the Anno Domini calendar in 526 AD. The Jews are expelled from Hungary. A comet appeared, bringing a terrible plague that afflicted Thuringia and the Netherlands. 1. Secrets of Nostradamus. 2. When Time Began, Sitchin. 3. Tacitus, Annals of Imperial Rome. 4. Sex symbols and the stars. 5. Jewish supremacism. 6. Gods of Eden, Bramley. 1583 AD, 5477 AM. Thomas Scaliger finished his Julian count, establishing a linear count of days beginning January 1st, 4714 BC, or 819 Annus Mundi. The Julian count is terribly inaccurate beyond any dates before 713 BC, because it assumed that the year has always been 365.25 days, instead of the older 360 days acknowledged by the nations of antiquity prior to 713 BC. Scaliger in this year published De Immediatione Temporum, a study stressing the importance of the ancient chronologies of the Persians, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Hebrews. He was fluent in Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic, and was known to have studied at some very rare library collections. 1. The God Kings of Europe, 1585 AD, 5479 AM. Sir Walter Raleigh sponsored the Roanoke colony on an island on the North Carolina coast, but the settlers vanished without a trace. Even Virginia Dare, the first white European settler from England, born in America, was among the missing. The settlers disappeared with food still out on the tables and all their belongings intact. This is referred to as the lost colony. Even the local Indians who were not hostile were baffled as to the disappearance of the English people. A comet was recorded by Europeans in September. On Introduction to Comets. 1586 AD, 5480 AM. A volcano at Java, Indonesia killed about 10,000 people. A gigantic asteroid cometary body passed over the ecliptic, passing through the inner solar system on its 92 years orbit after 40 years north of the ecliptic, on its way to collide into North America in 2046 AD, in 460 years, 5520 months. Pope Sixtus V removed the colossal Egyptian obelisk from the Vatican, placed there formerly by Emperor Caligula, at the Circus, to the front of St. Peter's Cathedral, where it remains today. The obelisk comes from the city of On, Anu, Memphis, where it had originally been erected by Israelite workers under the Hyksos dynasty in Lower Egypt. The monument stands 132 feet high, or 1584 inches, 792 plus 792. 1587 AD, 5481 AM. Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed after being falsely accused in a plan to kill Queen Elizabeth I of England. Mary had been Elizabeth's prisoner for 18 years, but was actually living quite well and being taken care of. Mary had many Catholic supporters, and this made Protestants allied to Elizabeth very nervous. The plot was hatched to forge documents that served as evidence at Mary's trial to get her executed. Her son was James of Scotland, who would later become King of England after Elizabeth's death because he was next in succession. 1. Infamous murders. 1588 AD, 5482 AM. King Philip of Spain attacks England with the dreaded Spanish Armada in response to the execution of the Catholic Queen Mary of Scotland. About 130 large warships set out from Lisbon, Portugal, in May toward Britain. This was essentially a religious war where Catholic Spain sought to impose Catholicism on Protestant England, using the execution of Mary as a pretext. To the amazement of all Europe, the small and poorly outfitted British vessels repelled the Spanish fleet, 54 light vessels against 130 warships. Though the British cannons could hardly penetrate the Spanish armour, their defence provoked the Armada to sail around Scotland. But as they sailed around Scotland, a violent storm laid waste to many of the warships, with the remnant sailing back to Spain in disgrace. The event signalled the end of Spanish naval power and began England's rise as the naval power of the world. 1589 AD, 5483 AM. At Quedlinburg, Germany, 133 people, mostly women, were burned at the stake for witchcraft in a single day. 1. Christ, the Power and the Passion. 1590 AD, 5484 AM. A comet was seen by Europeans in January. Inquisitor Henry Bouquet wrote that in this year almost the entire nation of Germany was busy cutting timber to burn witches. Whole villages lost their female populations to the pyres. At Nice in Silesia, Central Europe, a special oven was made in which mostly women were burned alive inside. In 9 years of use, over 1,000 women, including children 2 and 4 years old, were roasted alive. The Roman Catholic agents throughout Europe had a tremendous power over the minds of the laity because 90% of the commoners were illiterate and they blindly accepted what was told to them, deferring to the erudition of the priests, not knowing that this sadistic program had nothing to do with actual witchcraft. This insanity that claimed millions of innocent lives throughout Europe over the centuries would never have occurred except for the avarice of the Roman Catholic papacy. 1. Introduction to Comets. 2. Christ, the Power and the Passion. 1593 AD, 5487 AM. The Black Death strikes London. A first appearance of this plague in London, and it would strike a total of 5 times in the next 72 years, the final appearance being 1664 to 1665. 1. Mask of Nostradamus. 1596 AD, 5490 AM. A comet is recorded by Europeans. German astronomer David Fabricius watched the star Mira brighten for weeks and then fade into obscurity. In 2007 AD, a spectacular photo of this star was taken, showing an ultraviolet light picture of a 13 light-year long tail like a stellar comet. 1. Introduction to comets. 1600 AD, 5494 AM. After 8 years of imprisonment, Giordano Bruno is burned at the stake by the Roman Church for making scientific assertions in opposition to fundamental theological tenets. 1. Book of the Hopi. 1601 AD, 5495 AM. Queen Elizabeth ordered the expulsion of all black people from England after learning that 20,000 black slaves were located in the city of London alone. This year was 2376 years since the first Western calendar was implemented, the Olympiad calendar in 776 AD. 2376 years being 792 times 3. This year was 264 years before the last major Western world power freed the last black Africans from slavery, the Emancipation Declaration in 1865 in the United States. 264 years is 3168 months, or 792 times 4 months. 1. March of the Titans. 1602 AD, 5496 AM. John Greaves is born, died 1652. An English mathematician, antiquarian and professor of geometry. He was friend and colleague of Sir Isaac Newton. Greaves was famous for his scientific study of the Great Pyramid of Giza. 1603 AD, 5497 AM. King James of Scotland becomes King of England as well. James was determined to make the Puritans conform to the state church. These were people of high moral fabric, and they refused to conform with what they perceived were tainted church practices. So King James had them persecuted, hunted, and imprisoned. These English Puritans departed England in fleets to other countries where they met with similar fates, until they found refuge among the Dutch Republic in 1611. Devoutly Christian, they worked hard after leaving behind all their lands, estates, and possessions in England. They began to dream and make plans of founding their own country, a land where they would be free to worship God as they wanted, and not as how the state governments dictated. It would be these Puritans that would sail across the Atlantic and colonise the North American coast as the Pilgrims. 1. Planet in Rebellion. 1604 AD, 5498 AM. Galileo Galilei adopted the heliocentric view of the solar system as presented by Copernicus and Aristarchus almost 2,000 years prior. Galileo noted that the sudden appearance of a new star was evidence that the universe was not changeless. 1. The first Genesis. 1605 AD, 5499 AM. A conspiracy to blow up British Parliament and kill King James, known as the Gunpowder Plot, was discovered, and the Percy family conspirators fled England. The main plotter, Thomas Percy, an ancestor of George W. Bush, thought to detonate the building. Interestingly, this was 396 years before the 2001 AD World Trade Center tower destructions, 396 being half of 792. The WTC destructions occurring during George W. Bush's presidency. Elizabeth Bathory hung alive over 600 girls and bled them out into her baths to bathe in their blood. 1606 AD, 5500 AM. In December, 3 ships launched from London carrying 144 people, the Susan Constant, the Godspeed and the Discovery. All meant to settle North America, Jamestown. A comet was seen over Europe, followed by a plague. This was the 1080th year of the Anno Domini calendar, begun in 526 AD, A number is found in Chronicon 1 as being associated with dates involving Israel and its descendants. This was 1,000 years after 606 AD, when the Pope became the universal bishop over Europe, and 552 years after the Great Division of the Eastern and Western Christian churches of Europe in 1054 AD. North America was originally settled by religious dissidents, not satisfied with papal and government intrusion into their faiths. This was 540 years after the Norman invasion and takeover of England in 1066. 1. Time Almanac, Encyclopaedia Britannica, 2. Gods of Eden, Bramley. 1607 AD, 5501 AM. Halley's Comet passed and was observed and studied by Johann Kepler in October. The English set up the first permanent North American colony, Jamestown, in Virginia. The Masonic text entitled The Inigo Jones Document was compiled from older sources and concerned the secrets of Enoch and the Great Pyramid. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1608 AD, 5502 AM. Lippershey of the Netherlands invented the telescope 1 year prior to the model built by Galileo. Though Galileo heard of Lippershey's invention, Galileo seems to have figured out how to design his own, based off the descriptions he had heard from others. Ever since, Galileo has been immortalised as the inventor of the telescope. 1610 AD, 5504 AM. Galileo discovers 4 moons of Jupiter and infers that the Earth is not the centre of all motion. A Masonic text composed from older texts entitled The Wood Manuscript concerning Abraham and his history with the Great Pyramid and Egypt is dated this year. Hungarian Emperor Matthias II imprisoned Erzsébet Báthory in a cell for killing so many young girls. Moors had remained in Spain after the Moorish government was taken over by the Spanish, but now even these were expelled from the nation. The expulsion was for racial purposes and had nothing to do with Islam. 1. Human accomplishment. 2. Mad kings and queens. 3. March of the Titans. 1611 AD. 5505 AM. The most famous and widely read Bible in history, the Authorised King James Version 1611, was published in this year, the product of 47 approved translators organised into 6 groups spread throughout Westminster, Oxford and Cambridge universities. Once they completed their assigned parts, the materials were rearranged so other groups could critique the finished translations another group had made. Then the 6 groups met in London for 270 days to finalise the work before it was then edited by Sir Francis Bacon. Aside from the Greek Septuagint version of the Old Testament Pentateuch, the King James Bible may have been the only literary masterpiece ever written by a committee. The publication of the King James Version was instrumental in the fulfilment of biblical prophecies that declared that God's word would be known and taken throughout the earth by the descendants of the Israelites. The 270 days required for the completion of the book seemed in itself to be prophetic, each day representing a future year in world history, for the King James Version Bible was the main Bible of the English-speaking world until the publication of the Revised Version in 1881. Exactly 270 years later. Another number indicative of the timing of Israelite works and acts is 1244, found over and over in Chronicon 1 throughout Israelite history. 1611 was precisely 1244 years after Athanasius published his list of the New Testament books of the Bible, all of which were found in the King James Version from 367 AD. Sir Francis Bacon also wrote, quote, "You shall understand that which perhaps you will scarce think credible, that about 3,000 years ago, or somewhat more, the navigation of the world, especially for remote voyages, was greater than at this day." Unquote. 1. The Gospel Truth. 2. The Discoverers. 3. The Lost Treasure of King Juba. 1612 AD. 5506 AM. The Japanese government saw the rising population of Japanese Christians as a threat to their traditional culture and put to death almost the entire population of Japanese Christians, about 15,000 people. 1. March of the Titans. 1613 AD, 5507 AM. The troubled times in Russia ends with the beginning of the Romanov dynasty. This dynasty was much loved by the people, the Russians being a devout Christian nation, and the dynasty would endure for 304 years, until taken down in a conspiracy by the Jewish Bolsheviks in 1917, when the Romanovs are all assassinated. The ancient Book of Jasher, Tome of the Upright, survived millennia of invasions, book burnings and transference from hand to hand, on through Alexandria in Egypt, and later Rome, on through the Christian and Islamic library destructions, to finally be printed in Venice, Italy. This archaic Hebrew chronology of the world from the days of the first humans to Moses was called the Upright Record. The Book of Jasher unfortunately has been confused with its forgeries, and modern academia shuns the text after two controversies involving Jasher texts that were forged. The true scholarly backed translation of the Book of Jasher can be obtained today at thebooktree.com. 1614 AD, 5508 AM. Historian William Bramley wrote that in this year the German Order of the Rosicrucians at Hesse announced their presence in a dramatic publication, and that the policy of the order was to be publicly active and visible for 108 years before going underground again for another 108 years. This is intriguing, for the Masonic utopian empire, the United States of America, ends in cataclysm in 2046 AD, exactly 432 years, 108 times 3, from this date. John Rolfe of Jamestown in North America married the Native American girl Pocahontas, the daughter of Chief Powhatan. She had been earlier kidnapped. 1. Gods of Eden, Bramley. 2. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1616 AD, 5510 AM. The Japanese government passed the edict allowing for the persecution of Christians in Japan. The more the Japanese tried to purge the Christian element out of their culture, the more Christians seemed to multiply. Galileo Galilei stood before the court of the Inquisition because of his belief and teachings on the Copernican theory of a heliocentric system. Unlike others accused of heresy by the Church, Galileo was a highly venerated scientist of the day, and any overt move against him would have set the people against the Church. 1. God's laughter. 1618 AD, 5512 AM. The 30 Years' War begins between German Catholics and Protestants, ending in 1648. Called the Great War by the Germans, millions died as more and more European nations were drawn into the conflict against the German Catholic Habsburgs. This year was 3024 years, 1008 times 3, after Israel became a nation in 1407 BC, and 2160 years, precessional cycle, after the start of the Buddhist calendar in 543 BC. Early Christianity having many amazing parallels with Buddhism, as seen in Chronicon 1. As this was a war sponsored by the papacy, this was also 1080 years after the emergence of the papal office in 538 AD. 3 comets appeared in this year, studied by Johannes Kepler, also a source of fascination to Galileo. Some sources say there appeared 8 or 9 comets. 1. Introduction to Comets. 2. Gods of Eden. 1619 AD, 5513 AM. The first African slaves were sold to English colonists in Virginia, North America. 1620 AD, 5514 AM. The Pilgrims or Puritans sailed from Holland in the Dutch Republic on the Mayflower, where King James had driven them by his intolerance. They sailed toward North America, hoping to found a land where God was feared rather than a king. On their way, they stopped at Plymouth in England. Oswald Spengler wrote in his The Decline of the West, quote, "The belief that the English are the descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, a nation of saints predestined to govern the world, dominated also the immigration to America, which began with the Pilgrim Fathers of 1620, unquote. Interestingly, 1620 is 432 years, 108 times 4, before the beginning of the Anunnaki kingdom over mankind that begins in 2052 AD. The Pilgrims landed and interacted with the local Native Americans. They would be saved from starvation by Indians, which is the origin of Thanksgiving Day. Sir Francis Bacon published his Novum Organum, New Method, in which he explains the techniques for inductive reasoning. An old German newspaper on June 25th noted that for 8 days straight, the water in the city moat around a German town was red like blood. The English Pilgrim colony in North America, 1620, was established exactly 792 years after the first King of England was enthroned in 828 AD. Further, this was precisely 2,500 years, 50 Jubilees, after the founding of the Israelite capital city of Samaria in 881 BC. 1. The Decline of the West. 2. Commentaries on the occult philosophy of Agrippa. 1622 AD, 55:16 AM. Chief Opechancanough was the brother of the Indian leader Powhatan of the Chesapeake tribes, and he devised a plan to destroy the English settlers. Luring them into a false peace, he then launched simultaneous attacks on the settlements surrounding Jamestown that killed over 300 settlers. The English colonists retaliated by destroying Indian cornfields, which kept them in check for 22 years until 1644. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1624 AD, 55:18 AM. Japan reenacts the edict allowing for the persecution of Christians in Japan and its territories. This serves only to force the Christian movement underground, adding to its appeal and strengthening its bonds. Through the covenants of Christianity, the Japanese believers are adopted into the family of Israel. This year is 4736 years, 2368 times 2, after the start of the Mayan calendar, and this year was 2368 years after the 10 tribes of Israel are deported into the east by the Assyrians in 745 BC, initiating their migrations. Further, this year was exactly 70 Jubilees, 3,500 years, since the establishment of the Abrahamic covenant in 1877 BC, offered to Israel and then all who maintained faith in the Creator. 1626 AD, 55:20 AM. The scholar, famous mystic and writer and Chancellor of England, Sir Francis Bacon, Lord Verulam, died. This year ends the Phoenix cycle system of 552-year epochs of human history. These were measured by orbits of planet Phoenix. Planet Phoenix passes through the inner solar system on its 138-year orbit, probably unseen from Earth. However, on its next pass it will be seen clearly by hundreds of thousands of Europeans, and studied by astronomer Hoffmann through a telescope in 1764. In this year the Dutch purchase an island from the Manhattan Indians, still called Manhattan Island today, their settlement named New Amsterdam, which would later be renamed as the City of New York. This year begins a 414-year timeline, cursed Earth period, to the total destruction of the City of New York in 2040 AD, when the Atlantic Ocean will bury the city and entire eastern United States as planet Phoenix transits, initiating a slip of the lithosphere known as a pole shift. Also in this year, the Peruvian chronologist Ferdinand Montesinos finished his extensive Inca history. The research confirms the 1407 BC astronomical event of the Sun standing still over Canaan, the American version claiming that the Sun did not rise for 20 hours. Even the Phoenix period of 2070 years, 414 times 5, is confirmed in the Peruvian records, this Andean chronology mentioned in When the Sun Darkens. 1628 AD, 55:22 AM. From this year on through 1643, massive drought leads to the deaths of millions in China. Famine and disease and incidents of cannibalism are also reported. This social unrest and fatality leads to the fall of the Ming dynasty and the rise of the Manchus in 1645. The steam engine is invented, a machine motor that will alter the entire world, paving the way for industrial revolutions, which in turn influenced the global economy. 1 Apocalypse 2012 AD. 1631 AD, 55:25 AM. Mount Vesuvius in Italy erupted, killing about 4,000 people. 1 Natural disasters. 1633 AD, 55:27 AM. The Inquisition in Rome condemned Galileo, Pope Urban affirming, quote, "The proposition that the earth moves is absurd, philosophically false, and theologically considered at least erroneous in faith," unquote. 1 Popery, Foe of the Church. 1636 AD, 55:30 AM. Harvard College is founded, the oldest university in the United States. It initially was founded to train the Christian clergy, but it did have a large secular itinerary. The Pequot Indians of coastal New England traded with the Puritan settlers, but when a trader was murdered, the Puritans launched an attack on the Pequot fort on the Mystic River in the following year of 1637. 1 A Patriot's History of the United States. 1637 AD, 55:31 AM. The Puritans of New England, with Mohegan and Narragansett Indian allies, attacked the Mystic River fort of the Pequot Indians. The colonial fighters were from Connecticut and Massachusetts. They destroyed the wooden palisade and fortress and killed about 400 Pequot Indians, considered one of the first stunning victories of the English over Indians. 1 A Patriot's History of the United States. 1638 AD, 55:32 AM. After a series of intrigues, Japanese officials concluded that Catholic Christianity was a cloak for the political ambitions of the Pope and Spanish monarchy. Japan formally closed off its borders to all Europeans. John Greaves travelled to Egypt in 1637, and in this year he thoroughly studied the outside and inside of the Great Pyramid complex, seeking evidence of a universal measuring system incorporated within the dimensions of the monument, a project his colleague Sir Isaac Newton was earnestly awaiting the result of. Newton believed that the Great Pyramid's dimensions contained the encoded secrets of the universe. Greaves would publish his famous findings in Pyramidographia. In this year, a gigantic asteroid or cometary body passed through the inner solar system on its 92-year orbit, 40 years above the ecliptic and 52 years beneath it, on its way to collide into the North American continent in 2046. 1 A Short History of the World. 1639 AD, 55:33 AM. Astronomers all over Europe first witnessed through telescopes the transit of Venus, appearing as a tiny dot traversing across the face of the yellow sun. 1641 AD, 55:35 AM. Irish chief Rory O'More led a rebellion against the English to take Dublin. The hatred of the English seethed over abuses, and the Irish took revenge in killing about 30,000 English occupants of Dublin, Ireland. The war of religion in Ireland results in the total death of about 40,000 Protestants, the Irish being Catholic. Jesuit priests in Brazil sent back to the Vatican strange figurines discovered in Brazil, where antiquarians there translated the inscriptions on the statues. Learning that they were Punic, 800 to 140 BC, somehow Phoenician relics ended up in South America. 1 March of the Titans. 2 The Lost Treasure of King Juba. 1643 AD, 55:37 AM. Prophetic chronologist Heidelberg wrote that the Roman Catholic Church would fall from power in 1866, a belief shared by the Professor Cellarius of Basel, 1551, Robert Fleming, 1701, Gresner, 1690, among others. This prediction concerns the 1260 years of the rule of the beast over the 10 toes, 10 kingdoms of Europe, which became a multitude of European nations descended from the 12 tribes of migrating Israelites. The 1260 years was believed by these men to start in 606 AD, when the Pope was declared to be the universal bishop, the master over all other Christian bishops. As seen in 1866 AD, the Pope did indeed lose a lot of power, Sir Isaac Newton was born, largely remembered as being the first to record his ponderings over gravity and its force. Though Hipparchus about 2,000 years earlier explained the precession of the equinox and timed it at about 100 years, Newton recalculated this retrograde period and determined its exact longevity at 72 years per degree of movement. 11 degrees was 792 years, and 12 degrees was 864 years. Though Newton has been popularised as a leading scientific mind, and for the time he was, what is little known today is that Isaac Newton was an avid researcher into the deeper truth of the scriptures and was convinced that there were latent messages encoded within the biblical narratives. He diligently studied the biblical prophecies and wrote over 1 million words of commentaries on his own interpretations and thoughts. Newton was fascinated with the research of John Greaves. 1. Today, Tomorrow and the Great Beyond. 2. The Discoverers. 1644 AD, 55:38 AM. On May 27th, the Manchus of China marched toward Peking to reinforce allies fighting against the Ming dynasty, which had ruled for 276 years, 138 times 2. In a brilliant move, the Manchus concealed their army within a great dust storm and engaged the Chinese army of the Ming by surprise, taking Peking to establish the Qing dynasty that would go on to rule for 268 years. In North America, Chief Opechancanough launched another wave of Indian attacks against the English settlers that resulted in another 300 deaths in 2 days. This time the settlers captured Chief Opechancanough, shot him, and forced the Indians out of the region between the York and James River. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1645 AD, 55:39 AM. Astronomers noted a moon-like object near Venus. This was the first recorded sighting of this object, but there would be many more over the years. Some astronomers have searched diligently for this unknown object, only to find that it is gone. Later, the object is again reported by other astronomers. 1. Cataclysm. 1646 AD, 55:40 AM. The monumental research of John Greaves on the Great Pyramid was published in this year as Pyramidographia, or A Description of the Pyramids of Egypt, in England. He was made the Professor of Astronomy at Oxford. On May 20th, strange sounds accompanied with rumblings were heard in the skies all over England, throughout Norfolk, Suffolk and Cambridgeshire. A pillar of cloud appeared that seemed to ascend from the earth, pyramidal in form. Others describe it as a steeple ascending from the earth. At the same time, the witnesses claimed that a cloudy spike descended from the sky to encounter it. 1. Secret symbols of the dollar bill. 2. The world's most mysterious objects. 1648 AD, 55:42 AM. The 30 Years' War ended in Germany between those Catholic Habsburgs and the Protestants of Europe with the Peace of Westphalia, ending the Holy Roman Empire of Germany, founded in 962 AD. The Taj Mahal at Agra, India is finished. John Aubrey discovered that the huge hill called Avebury in England was artificial. This mound is so immense that the entire village had been built inside it, its sheer size disguising its artificiality, the locals thinking it was a natural hill. 1649 AD, 55:43 AM. King Charles I is executed for treason at the behest of Oliver Cromwell, who was backed by Parliament. Cromwell then permitted the Jews to come back to England, reversing the expulsion edict, issued and enforced since 1290 AD by King Edward I. 1. The Synagogue of Satan. 1650 AD, 55:44 AM. Archbishop James Ussher calculated that the Great Flood occurred in 2348 BC. This is only 109 years off from the true 2239 BC, demonstrated in many ways in Chronicon 1. The Great Flood ended a specific 432,000-day countdown, known to the ancients before the flood, and this year of 1650 AD was exactly 3888 years after the flood, or 432 times 9 years after 2239 BC. 1. The incredible discovery of Noah's Ark. 1651 AD, 55:45 AM. Antonio de Castro del Castillo, Bishop of La Paz in South America, wrote concerning the enigmatic megalithic ruins of Pumapunka near Tiwanaku, quote, "It has not been concluded that these structures date from before the flood," unquote. As seen in Chronicon 1, these ruins were left from the global cataclysm that occurred 552 years after the Great Flood, in the year 1687 BC, when planet Phoenix transited, darkening the sun and afflicting the planet with devastating earthquakes. William Lilly of England predicted that the plague would return to London and that the city of London would be destroyed in a fire. Both of these would occur in 15 more years. 1. De Castro del Castillo, Teatro Eclesiastico, 1652 AD, 55:46 AM. John Greaves died, famous for his research on the pyramids of Egypt. This year ends the 12th Baktun of the Mayan long count calendar, begun in 3113 BC, being 1,728,000 days, or 144,000 times 12 days. This begins the final Baktun of 144,000 days to the year 2046 AD, when Nibiru pushes Earth off its present orbit around the Sun into a much tighter orbit that abbreviates the year to 240 days and the day to 16 hours, when North America is destroyed by a comet meteorite impact. A comet is reported by Europeans in this year, in November. A meteorite crashed between Siena and Rome in May. 1. Introduction to Comets. 2. Book of the Damned. 1653 AD, 55:47 AM. The tomb of Merovingian king Childeric I, father of Clovis I, was accidentally discovered by a stonemason working on a church. Inside the tomb were found 300 golden bees. 12 years later, these bees would be given to the French king Louis XIV in 1665. The bee was a symbol of royalty. 1. The world's most mysterious objects. 1656 AD, 55:50 AM. Manasseh bin Israel, leader of the Jews of Amsterdam, visited London and met with the Puritan English minister Oliver Cromwell, persuading him to allow the Jews to return to England. The Jews had been disallowed entrance into England since the expulsion edict of 1290 AD by King Edward I, 366 years earlier. Cromwell was an avid reader of the scriptures. This year 1656 is 414 times 4, or 552 times 3, the Annus Mundi year of 1656 being 2239 BC, when the Great Flood occurred. Edmund Halley was born, famous for discovering that a returning comet was the same comet that had returned many previous times, named Halley's. He predicted its return, and 16 years after his death it did return in 1758. Archbishop James Ussher died, the Christian chronologist who dated the beginning of the world at 4004 AD and Armageddon at 1996 AD. Ussher's chronology became the accepted Orthodox chronology, despite its errors. His chronology is 110 years off, just as the ancient Jewish calendar used today is 133 years off. 1. History in quotations. 1657 AD, 5551 AM. The dark satellite, a former rock and metal moon of Nibiru, passes through the inner solar system after 395 years orbiting the Sun. This begins its final orbit of 395 years to its return to pass close to Earth in 2052 AD, bringing the 7 kings of the Anunnaki, who will rule mankind during the Beast Kingdom. 1658 AD, 5552 AM. 2 years after he died, James Ussher's chronology was published as The Annals of the World, deduced from the origin of time. It was an instant success, the talk of England and Europe. This year was exactly 5,000 plus 552 years Annus Mundi, or 1658 AD. Phoenix is seen in When the Sun Darkens, and Nostradamus and the Planets of Apocalypse was the planet of chronology, 552 years being a phoenix cycle. 1660 AD, 5554 AM. The Royal Society is formed in London by Freemasons. It would become official in 1662. The society would become the world's foremost knowledge filter in establishing what would be considered scientifically true or heretical. Britain enacted the Navigations Act to regulate colonial commerce to fit the needs of England. 1661 AD, 55:55 AM. Europeans report the appearance of a comet in January. 1. Introduction to comets. 1664 AD, 5558 AM. The English take over New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island and rename it New York. This city would become the financial epicenter for global commerce, a great metropolis with steel and glass towers to heaven. The Black Death Plague strikes London for the 5th time since 1593 when it first appeared. The following year would see the greatest loss of life. Astronomer Robert Hooke discovered the red spot on the surface of Jupiter, an unusual gigantic region about the size of Earth that appears to move around in a liquid state that never wanders too far from its latitude, as if tethered to the area. This was the 4,000th year since the birth of Shem in 2337 BC, ancestral patriarch of the Semites. 1. The Age of Reason. 2. The Mask of Nostradamus. 3. Our Haunted Planet. 1665 AD, 5559 AM. The Black Death Plague in London, England, alone killed 68,596 people, but estimates of the total death toll in England was closer to 100,000 between this and 1666. This is the 72nd year since the arrival of the plague in 1593. In March, a blue silky substance fell from a clear blue sky in great quantities near Naumburg. 1. Great disasters. 2. The Mask of Nostradamus. 3. Book of the Damned. 1666 AD, 5560 AM. The Great Fire of London devastates the city, many believing that it also rid them of the plague. This fire was first predicted by Nostradamus and then later by William Lilly. The astrologer Lilly was summoned to stand before Parliament to prove himself, to show that it was not he that started the fires. Successfully defending himself, he was freed. The Dutch fleet engaged the English at the mouth of the Thames River and saw 6,000 English dead, with only 800 Dutch fatalities. The English lost 23 vessels. This was the 600th year since the Norman invasion of England in 1066 AD. The Lutheran prelate Benedict Karpsov died, a fanatic who had condemned to death over 20,000 women. An astronomical observatory established in Paris, France, and King Louis XIV established the Paris Meridian, a longitudinal line that ran straight through Paris on a Franco-centric map. John Milton completes his epic Paradise Lost, published the following year. Concerning the fall of man, Sir Isaac Newton invents the mirror telescope. Concerning telescopes, in this year, Gian Domenico Sassini reported that he had discovered ice caps at the polar extremities on the planet Mars. It is to be noted that Cassini at this time did not mention seeing any moons orbiting Mars, which would not be discovered until 1877 AD. Many believe these 2 moons around Mars recently appeared in orbit. John Aubrey studied Stonehenge and discovered the famous Aubrey holes. 1. Sages and Seers. 2. March of the Titans. 3. Christ the Power and the Passion. 4. The First Genesis. 5. The Stone Angle. 1667 AD, 5561 AM. A Dutch fleet sailed up the Thames River in England and destroyed much shipping. The Anglo-Dutch hostilities were concerning the English takeover of New Amsterdam, renamed New York. In August, a hurricane destroyed the first English colony, Jamestown. In November at Shimaka, China, an earthquake killed 80,000 people. 1. March of the Titans. 2. Natural disasters. 1668 AD, 5562 AM. The famous English pirate Henry Morgan took the leading Spanish port on the American Atlantic coast, Portobello. Hevelius in his Cometographia wrote about the great comet that was seen in the year of the Exodus, 1447 BC. Robert Hooke proposed that fossils can be used as a source of information about Earth's early history. A huge 116-carat diamond of bluish colour was stolen from India and brought to King Louis XIV. In 1673, a court jeweller would cut it down to 67 carats, and the French would call it the Blue Crown Diamond. This is the origin of the Hope Diamond. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 2. Worlds in Collision, Velikovsky. 3. Human Accomplishment. 4. The World's Most Mysterious Objects. 1669 AD, 5563 AM. On March 17th, on the town of Châtillon-sur-Sienne, a reddish liquid rain that was thick and putrid. Mount Etna in Sicily erupted, attended with tremors and quakes from March the 8th to the 11th, leaving 100,000 people dead. 1. Book of the Damned, 2 Great Disasters. 1670 AD, 5564 AM. A monk suffering an ailment at a hermitage at Mount Ararat rewarded the physician who cured him, a Dutchman named Jans Janzoon Struys, with a small carved cross carved out of a dark and very heavy wood, seemingly petrified. The monk claimed that the wood was the ancient timber taken from the wreckage of an old ship high upon the glacial mountain said to be Noah's Ark. The Dutchman took the relic to St. Peter's Church in Rome, one in search of Noah's Ark. 1671 AD, 5565 AM. Jean Picard's Mesure de la Terre provides an estimate of the Earth's size accurate to within 90 feet. The British philosopher Henry Moore released his book, Enchiridion Metaphysicum, wherein he argued for the existence of a fourth dimension beyond our senses that serves as a home to spirits and demons. 1. Human Accomplishment, 2. Hyperspace. 1672 AD, 5566 AM. A comet reported by Europeans in February. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1673 AD, 5567 AM. Around August, European explorers discovered a painting on an 80-foot high cliff of Piazza, local name for monster. The monster painting had a large humanoid face with antlered horns and great wings that looked almost identical to the second millennium depictions of cherub guardians in Mesopotamia. It has been photographed in modern times and was located above the Mississippi River near Alton, Illinois, recorded by Father Marquette and since seen by thousands. 1675 AD, 5569 AM. Many Indian tribes came together under the Indian leader Metacomet and made war against the English settlers. This was known at the colonies as King Philip's War. It would end in disaster for the Indians in the following year. The Greenwich Observatory was founded in London, and like France, England also made their maps Anglo-centric, with the prime meridian running north-south through England rather than France, though this would not yet be made official until later, and adopted by the entire world even after this. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States of America. 1676 AD, 5570 AM. The Indian Confederation forces were defeated by the colonists, ending King Philip's War. Rebel planters under Nathaniel Bacon burned the town of Jamestown in defiance of the British authority. This is exactly 100 years before the 13 colonies of England would declare their independence from England in 1776. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1677 AD, 5571 AM. A comet recorded by Europeans in April. Danish astronomer Olaf Rømer studied the moons of Jupiter, especially Io and its eclipse times, developing a theory that light has speed, a concept unheard of at the time as all researchers had accepted that light appeared instantaneously. Now we know that light travels at 186,000 miles per second. It is interesting that the moons of far distant Jupiter were being studied at a time when Mars was also seriously studied and seemed to have no moons, though 2 moons were suddenly there orbiting Mars in 1877. 1. Introduction to Comets, 2. Cosmic Codes. 1678 AD, 5572 AM. The first artistic depiction of a crop circle, agroglyph, is made. The locals call the apparition that made the crop circle the mowing devil. The crop circle phenomenon will spike amazingly in the 1990s and the first decade to the 2000s. A gigantic asteroid cometary body passed through the inner solar system, crossing over the ecliptic on its 92-year orbit, 40 years above the ecliptic, 52 years below, to collide into the North American continent in 2046 AD. 1. Crop circles, God's and their secrets. 1680 AD, 5574 AM. The Anunnaki planet Nibiru is at aphelion, furthest distance from the Sun, the final aphelion before it returns to nearly collide into Earth in 2046, beginning its 366-year journey back toward the inner solar system. A comet appeared in December and was studied by a student of Hevelius named George Dorfel, also by John Flamsteed and Edmund Halley. Later Isaac Newton wrote about it. 1. Introduction to Comets. The Mask of Nostradamus. 1682 AD, 5576 AM. A comet appeared and was studied by Edmund Halley. He realised that the unusual retrograde motion resembled the comet of 1607 and the Great Comet of 1456. He predicted that the same comet would return in 1758. Though he was correct in that it was the same comet, he was wrong about its return, which was in 1759. This was later named Halley's Comet. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1683 AD, 5577 AM. A comet is reported in July by Europeans. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1684 AD, 5578 AM. A comet is recorded in May by Europeans. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1685 AD, 5579 AM. King Louis XIV of France, in the Edict of Nantes, declared France to be a Catholic state, a bad move for the nation, for 200,000 Protestants fled the country, among them the nation's most skilled artisans and people of affluence. Most of these people made their way to North America. Like the earlier English colonies, North America was being peopled with Europeans escaping religious persecution. King James II ascends the English throne, and like a dictator, he recalls the New England and Middle Colony charters, violating constitutionalism and the sanctity of contracts. 1. March of the Titans. 2. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1686 AD, 5580 AM. A comet is recorded by Europeans in September. King James II of England created a centralised political state over the English colonies called the Dominion of New England. The colonial legislatures were dismissed, town meetings forbidden, and the militias were forbidden to operate without the approval of the King's appointee in Boston. This resulted in the colonial rebellions which lasted until 1689. The Dominion of New England came to nothing. 1. Introduction to Comets. 2. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1687 AD, 5581 AM. A terrible quake at Callao, Peru, results in massive loss of life and property. The famous Greek structure, the Parthenon, was ruined by the Italians over 21 centuries after the Greeks erected it. The Parthenon was adorned with reliefs of the War of the Titans and Giants, the Trojan War, as well as of Nereus the Aegean Noah. William Stukely, born this year, an antiquarian interested in Stonehenge, who died in 1765. Intriguingly, this parallels the 1687 BC damaging of the Stonehenge complex. During the earthquakes that transpired, as Phoenix transited between Earth and the Sun, the rebuilding of the site being Stonehenge 3. Sir Isaac Newton's discoveries are published in his Principia Mathematica, a text still regarded as one of the greatest scientific works ever composed. In it, he predicts that the Earth is non-spherical, which he is correct. This led to the discovery of the equatorial bulge. 1. Ancient Mysteries. 2. God's Laughter. 1688 AD, 5582 AM. Emanuel Swedenborg was born at Stockholm, Sweden, a truly remarkable spiritual giant and prolific writer who died in 1772. 1689 AD, 5583 AM. American English colonials staged an armed insurrection in Boston against British Governor Sir Edmund Andros of New York on the 108th day of the year, April 18. The English Civil War between the Whigs and Tories resulted in King James II being exiled while Parliament drafted the Declaration of Rights, an historical document declaring that the King and Queen was not supreme but shared authority with the English legislature and the courts. Free speech and the right to petition was made, and excessive bail and cruel and unusual punishment forbidden. This document also upheld the right of English Protestants to keep and to bear arms. It was these concepts that would later galvanise into the American Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, the US Constitution exactly 100 years later in 1789, and the Bill of Rights. 1. The Patriots' History of the United States. 1690 AD, 5584 AM. The astronomer Cassini observed what appeared to be a comet colliding into Jupiter through his telescope. A comet would again collide into Jupiter in 1994 AD and be photographed. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1691 AD, 5585 AM. The Aztecs unwillingly collected their sacred books and brought them to the Spanish bishop Núñez de la Vega, who promptly burned them all. The Roman Catholic authorities had already done this to the Inca and the Maya. 1. The Problem of Atlantis. 1692 AD, 5586 AM. An earthquake struck Port Royal, Jamaica, which was a haven for thieves and pirates, smugglers and slavers, a black market paradise where buyers could purchase stolen ships and even cargoes. This was one of the busiest ports in the West Indies. The quake sent a tidal wave into the port and city, and the earth vibrated, opening up under the feet of many people, swallowing them up to their necks before the ground began compressing, squeezing the victims to death. An unusually putrid rain fell upon Germany. At Salem, Massachusetts, 143 people were accused of witchcraft after wildly circulating rumours, but 19 were actually hanged on what came to be called Witches' Hill, and one man was pressed to death. Later, all of their convictions were reversed after they were dead, subsequent to new inquiries. Some blame the popular hysteria over witchcraft at that time on Cotton Mather, an imaginative writer, the son of the preacher Increase Mather. The Salem witch trials has since become a world-famous event. 1. Pirates, Terror on the High Seas. 2. Commentaries on the Occult Philosophy of Agrippa. 1693 AD, 5587 AM. An earthquake in Catania, Italy, killed 60,000 people. 1694 AD, 5588 AM. The Bank of England started a privately owned business aloud because it loaned a lot of money to King William III of England with the agreement that the bank could issue notes to the full extent of its capital. This bank created non-existent money from the interest it received on monies loaned that it had created using paper notes. Edward Halley proposed to the Royal Society that Noah's flood, 2239 BC, had been caused by the collision of a comet into Earth. 80 years after their published presence in 1614, the Rosicrucians founded a colony in North America, where Pennsylvania is today. Their artistic building in Ephrata, Ephraim, still stands today. François-Marie Arouet was born in Paris, known to the world as the philosopher Voltaire. 1. The Synagogue of Satan. 2. Ancient Civilizations. Ancient Mysteries. 3. Gods of Eden, Bramley. 1696 AD, 5590 AM. The Reverend William Whiston was a friend of Edmund Halley and the personal laboratory assistant to Sir Isaac Newton. Whiston began preaching that comets were responsible for several of the Old Testament astronomical occurrences, as well as the Great Flood, and that comets were a large part of the future apocalypse. He was a mathematician and wrote a book entitled The Cause of the Flood Demonstrated, published in 1711. 1. Prophets of Doom. 1698 AD, 5592 AM. A comet was reported by Europeans in October. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1699 AD, 5593 AM. An earthquake killed 400,000 people in China. 1. The Portable Voltaire. 1701 AD, 5595 AM. Yale University was founded. The Masonic Constitution is drafted, telling of those who lived before the Great Flood, and discovered geometry, the building craft, and how all their scientific secrets and knowledge was inscribed upon the surfaces of two huge pillars, pyramids in Egypt. 1703 AD, 5597 AM. Flooding kills 100,000 people in Awa, Japan. 1705 AD, 5599 AM. Edmund Halley of England published his A Synopsis of the Astronomy of Comets, which included data of orbits of comets and the first prediction of the return of a comet, Halley's Comet. 1. Human accomplishment. 1706 AD, 5600 AM. The illustrious Benjamin Franklin was born, a prodigy of intellectual energy and spirit, a man destined to be one of the most important movers in the American independence movement. He was born exactly 3552 years after the birth of Isaac in 1847 BC, 3552 being 1776 plus 1776 years. A major golden proportion number, and also the Anno Domini year, 1776 AD, of the Declaration of American Independence. Benjamin Franklin was a patriarch of the United States, just as Isaac was the patriarch over Israel. The new Israel, prophetically known as the Empire of Adoption, as Ephraim, doubly bountiful. In this year, French forces entered Spanish Aragon and uncovered the ghastly work of the Spanish Inquisition. Human bodies were mangled and abused beyond recognition. They also found a harem belonging to the Inquisitor General, where 60 young women were kept for the Inquisitor's pleasure. Since then, many Roman Catholic nunneries have been discovered to be little more than prisons and dungeons, full of hapless sex slaves, boys and girls, for the pleasure of the priests. 1. Popery, foe of the Church. 1707 AD, 5601 AM. England, Scotland and Wales are united, forming the United Kingdom. Volcanic activity on Santorini is recorded, the same volcano that erupted during the 10 plagues over Egypt in 1447 BC. 1708 AD, 5602 AM. William Whiston, pupil of Sir Isaac Newton, published a book explaining that a comet caused Noah's flood, thus enraging Newton. 1. Ancient Mysteries. 1709 AD, 5603 AM. The very first daily newspaper began in London, England. 1. Emanuel Swedenborg. 1714 AD, 5608 AM. The mercury thermometer was invented, paving the way for the regulation of temperature in the development of engines and machines. 1718 AD, 5612 AM. Edward Teach from Bristol, England, began a world-famous sea career as a privateer, but ended as a pirate named Blackbeard. Blackbeard took as many as 20 ships from Virginia to the Honduras. He blockades Charleston, South Carolina, with 1 warship and 3 lesser vessels, holding the town for ransom. In his flagship Queen Anne's Revenge, he terrorised the seas from the West Indies to the North American coasts, with his crew of 300, and even bested a British warship. In this year, Blackbeard was killed in a naval battle off the Virginia coast. 1. Pirates, terror of the high seas. 1720 AD, 5614 AM. Comet Nexel is bright as it passes close to Earth. The ancient charges of Freemasonry are destroyed. Volcanic activity and earthquakes in the Azores. The infamous pirate Calico Jack and his crew were captured by the British. In the battle, the 2 women, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, were the only ones to offer the British resistance. These 2 females were vicious and both illegitimate daughters, Anne being the daughter of a prominent attorney, William Cormac, and Mary was the daughter of a woman in London who gave birth to her after her husband had been away for more than a year at sea. Mary died in prison of fever that year. Calico Jack and his crew were all hanged, but Anne vanished after being imprisoned. Some believe her father's influence had her released. In this same year, the pirate leader Bartholomew Roberts, with nothing but a sloop and crew of 60 men, defeated the combined forces of 1,200 sailors aboard 22 ships lying at anchor in Newfoundland's Trespassy Bay. 1. Pirates, terror of the high seas. 1722 AD, 5616 AM. Pirate Lord Bartholomew Roberts, after an amazing career of 4 years, in which he orchestrated the capture of over 400 sails, the Welshman from Pembrokeshire found himself captured by English Captain Challoner Ogle of the 50-cannon HMS Swallow. Roberts and his crew were drunk, passed out and at anchor, but Roberts fought to the death. Dutch Admiral Jacob Roggeveen commanded a fleet of 3 vessels that discovered an inhabited island in the South Pacific at Easter time, naming it Easter Island. The Dutch were amazed at the sight of the gigantic artefact faces and heads on the island that the natives had no memory of. It has since been learned that Easter Island was a ceremonial centre for an expansive empire of Pacific Island nations that no longer exists now that 60% of the island is below sea level. This year was 792 times 5 years, 3960, after the deluge in 2239 BC. 1. Pirates, terror on the high seas, 2. Ancient mysteries. 1726 AD, 5620 AM. The spirit of revival instilled a powerful Christian movement in the English colonies of North America, known as the Great Awakening, exactly one jubilee 50 years before these same Christian colonies would become the United States of America in 1776 AD. This was the 1200th year of the Anno Domini calendar since it began in 526 AD, the year of our Lord timeline. The entire Chronicon timeline covers a period from the start of the Anunnaki calendar in 5239 BC, explained in Chronicon 1, to the year 2106 AD, which is the 6,000th year of the curse on mankind, begun in 3895 BC, the period being 7344 years altogether, or 3672 plus 3672 years. A timeline also encoded prominently in the Great Pyramid's chronometry, as seen in chronotecture. Half of this period, 3672 years, is the distance between the birth of Abraham in 1947 BC and 1726 AD, when some of his descendants experienced the Great Awakening. The 3rd edition of Newton's Principia was released. Jonathan Swift published his Gulliver's Travels, a highly imaginative work of fiction, and a perfect example of retrocausality, influence from the future. For Swift wrote about Mars having 2 unusually shaped moons with unusual orbits. Incredibly, though astronomers had studied Mars since the invention of the telescope, no moons had ever been seen, not even in 1727. But in 1877, 2 irregularly shaped moons with odd orbits were first witnessed by Asaph Hall in 1877, 150 years later. 1. Introduction to Comets. 1727 AD, 5621 AM. The Jews in Russia are accused of financial malpractices and expelled from the country. 1. March of the Titans. 1728 AD, 5622 AM. Astronomer James Bradley discovers that light has speed. This discovery, published 52 years after that of Römer's discovery of the same thing in 1677. Bradley's discovery, published in 1729. 1. Cosmic Codes. 1730 AD, 5624 AM. Earthquake activity begins and lasts for 5 years to 1735 in the Canary Islands, releasing noxious gases that kill much wildlife. A quake at Hokkaido, Japan, killed 137,000 people. A gigantic asteroid comet passed through the inner solar system on its 92-year orbit, 40 years above the ecliptic, on its way to collide into the North American continent in 2046. 1. Antediluvian world. 1731 AD, 5625 AM. From Florence is witnessed a luminous cloud moving across the sky at a high velocity, accompanied by an earthquake on December the 9th. 1. Book of the Damned. 1732 AD, 5626 AM. This was the final year that England would have only 12 colonies in North America, for in the following year the 13th colony would be admitted. The number of colonies that rebelled against Britain and became the United States of America, the fulfilled prophetic type of the 13 tribes of Israel, the 13th being the tribe of adoption, Manasseh Ephraim of Joseph. On May 28th, over Swabia are seen fiery globes passing through the sky, preceding an earthquake. This year was 1776 of the Roman Julian calendar. 1 Book of the Damned. 1733 AD, 56:27 AM. The 13th colony is added to the English colonies in North America, Georgia, founded by debtors and prisoners who were sent from England. The Georgians welcomed all religious refugees, including Jews, but they refused to admit any Catholics. More and more white Europeans were turning their attention to these colonies. The prosperity of the English colonies was the source of much fascination in Europe. E.G. White wrote that, quote, "It was demonstrated that the principles of the Bible are the surest safeguards of national greatness. The feeble and isolated colonies grew to a confederation of powerful states, and the world marked with wonder the peace and prosperity of a church without a pope and a state without a king," unquote. With the start of Georgia began the fulfillment of future Israel as Ephraim, the adopted tribe, meaning doubly fruitful, the tribe of adoption that would be made from all the tribes combined, i.e., all the peoples of the nations of Europe and the Mediterranean, where the descendants of the 13 tribes of Israel were scattered, which is the subject of Chronicon 1. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 2. Planet in Rebellion. 1735 AD, 56:29 AM. This date marks another Great Awakening revival, this time regional in Massachusetts. The religious freedom of the American colonies was unmatched anywhere else in the world. No religious authority or civil one exercised their will over the Christians of the colonies. 1736 AD, 56:30 AM. England repeals the witchcraft statutes, which were being used to hunt and murder many innocent people, mostly women. 1737 AD, 56:31 AM. An earthquake at Calcutta, India, killed 300,000 people. Over Carpentras, France, it rained soil and dirt from the sky on October the 18th. 1 Book of the Damned. 1738 AD, 56:32 AM. The Jews of Russia are again expelled after allegations of financial malpractice. 1 March of the Titans. 1740 AD, 56:34 AM. Telescope maker and astronomer James Short discovered a moon-like object near Venus, passing through the inner solar system. This was not the first time, as seen in Chronicon 2, that a moon-like object has been seen near Venus, and again in 1759 another one will be seen. This is 6048 years of the Phoenix chronology, or 864 times 7 years. 1741 AD, 56:35 AM. Spreading from Massachusetts, now all the American colonies experienced the Great Awakening, a period of tremendous religious growth when church attendance soared and large open-air meetings occurred, preachers travelling from town to town. This was termed New Light Christianity. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1742 AD, 56:36 AM. For a third time the Jews are expelled from Russia, again for financial malpractice. Even at this early date, Jewish antagonists tried to infiltrate the Christian Empire of Russia, and unfortunately one of the greatest human tragedies to occur would be the Jewish Bolshevik takeover of Russia and their extermination of millions of Christian Russians after 1917, 1 March of the Titans. 1743 AD, 56:37 AM. Count Saint-Germain first appeared in London, a man of unknown origin who could speak all of the European languages fluently. He maintained vast social skills, claimed to have lived for centuries by virtue of an elixir of life, even claiming to have been alive when Jesus and Cleopatra lived. Saint-Germain astounded European historians with his immense historical knowledge, and Voltaire said that Saint-Germain knew everything. Saint-Germain claimed that his extraordinary knowledge came by virtue of having, quote, studied in the pyramids, unquote. Because by erudition it is easy to fool many, by no means it is easy to fool everyone. The person of Saint-Germain is indeed a profound mystery, begging the question, was he even human? One ruled by secrecy. 1744 AD, 56:38 AM. The Jews are expelled from Slovakia. The great daytime comet appears terrifying Europe, a comet that filled the sky with 7 tails. In England there was mass apocalyptic fear that the world was going to end. Astronomers named it Comet de Chasseau. This was 2488 years, 1244 plus 1244, after the 10 tribes of Israel were deported by Assyria in 745 BC. The Annus Mundi year 2488 being 1407 BC, when the nation of Israel began its conquest of Canaan. Jews were also expelled out of Moravia and Bohemia. 1. Jewish supremacism. 2. End of Eden. 1746 AD, 5640 AM. Princeton College was founded by Protestants, oriented toward religious and moral philosophy. 1749 AD, 5643 AM. A storm at the West Azores uncovered a broken cask in the sand that contained a mass of ancient coins. Numismatists studied the coins and reported them to be Carthaginian from the 4th and 3rd century BC. 1. How the sun god reached America. 1751 AD, 5645 AM. A particularly damaging forgery of the Book of Jasher is published at Bristol, England. This copy came to the attention of scholars and they quite correctly labelled it a forgery. The real translation of the Book of Jasher ignored by academics because of the controversy. It is possible that the forgeries, another forgery was published in 1829, were designed to scare off the serious researcher, as the Book of Jasher is an amazing and ancient chronology of the Old World, a book mentioned twice in the Old Testament. 1752 AD, 5646 AM. On April 15th over Slavenge, Norway, was seen in the heavens a strange star of octagonal shape, and balls of fire fell from the sky, a streak across the sky seen from Ångermanland. This was exactly 3600 years, 600 times 6, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the Indus Valley cities in 1849 BC. In this year, Benjamin Franklin proved that lightning is electricity and theorised that it could somehow be harnessed. The famous Liberty Bell was cast in England and delivered to Isaac Norris, who ordered it in Pennsylvania, bearing the inscription from the book of Leviticus 25:10, quote, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof," unquote. This same year the bell cracked, and the colonial American company Parsons Stowe recast the bell with less copper and more iron, to be expected from a nation to become an iron empire. In this year, Great Britain finally adopted the Gregorian calendar implemented by Pope Gregory XIII, and decreed that the calendrical system would also be adopted by the 13 colonies of America. September the 2nd thus became September 14th, and all dates prior to the alteration were designated OS for Old Style. 1. Book of the Damned. 1753 AD, 5647 AM. The Liberty Bell is placed in the Philadelphia State House and was used by the Continental Congress. 1754 AD, 5648 AM. George Washington leads the colonial militia in the French and Indian War. The 13 colonies allied to the 5 nations of the Iroquois Indians against the French, a war fought between French Canada and the British colonies. The French capture a British fort and Washington leads 160 militiamen and builds Fort Necessity. The French, with their own Indian allies, besieged the fort, and with no food or supplies, torrential rains having dampened their gunpowder, Washington surrendered on July 4th, as 2,000 men besieged his small unit. George was a devout colonial loyal to the English, and the son of the Christian mystic Mary Ball. She raised George to believe that fear and cowardice were sins, and that courage was faith that God could see him through all trials. Missionaries in South America discovered Phoenician inscriptions on toppled pillars in the Amazon jungle. Jean de Elembert published his article entitled Dimension, where he postulated that time was the 4th dimension. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 2. The Lost Treasure of King Juba. 3. Hyperspace. 1755 AD, 5649 AM. George Washington of the colonial militia advised British General Braddock on the unusual guerrilla tactics employed in North America, explaining that European-type warfare was not conducted in America. The Indians had taught the English colonials about this style of fighting, a method unknown to the redcoats. General Braddock ignored George Washington and marched 1,000 redcoats and 300 colonials toward Fort Duquesne. The French were warned of the British advance, obtained help from their Indian allies, and even the aid of an old Indian sharpshooter, with an established reputation for having never missed a target. The sharpshooter was employed by the French to kill George Washington, who was feared more so over that of General Braddock. On July 9th, only miles away from the fort, 300 concealed French and Indian soldiers fired upon and killed or wounded 800 of General Braddock's men. While the redcoats fled in panic, George Washington stood his ground, commanding the 300 colonials who trusted him from past experience, fighting off the ambush. The old Indian shot at Washington and was amazed that he missed, shot again and again and a fourth time, all missing the towering enemy commander. The Indian was spooked because he knew he did not miss those shots. General Braddock died in the ambush, and years later after the war, the old Indian visited the camp of George Washington at the Virginia colony, explaining that it was he that had shot at him those 4 times for the French. George pulled out the old coat he had worn in that battle and showed the Indian the 4 bullet holes, but told him that not a bullet hit his body. The Indian concluded that George was charmed, fated to never die in battle. This visit was in 1762, 13 years before the Revolutionary War. On June 7th, a quake in Persia killed 40,000 people. This was followed in November, on All Saints' Day, by a transcontinental earthquake that shook the islands and seas from the Baltic to the West Indies, and Canada to Egypt, Algiers, Morocco, throughout northern Africa, up to Germany, Holland, Spain and France. About 10,000 people in Morocco were swallowed by the earth, and the world-famous port of Lisbon, Portugal, was worst afflicted. An expansive granite quay fractured off and plunged into the sea, drowning 60,000 people who had fled to it thinking it was the safest place. Whole ships in the harbour were pulled under water as the city trembled and burned. Not a trace of those unfortunate people or ships were ever found. No clothes, no bodies, no driftwood. The seafloor in that region dropping 600 feet. By 2 p.m. as far as England that day, it was noted that the ocean was unusually restless with high waves. Both England and Scotland were shaken by the mighty quake, causing the people to fast and pray at specially held services. The churches throughout were full of people, being All Saints' Day, and these buildings killed many. About 85% of Lisbon was destroyed, and lost among the ruins were a collection of ancient artefacts of Roman vintage that had been excavated in Peru. At the same time of the earthquake, the warm springs of Teplitz, Bohemia, disappeared, but later sprouted forth again. A volcano in Iceland erupted, followed by an uprising, and then subsidence of the water of Loch Lomond in Scotland. Just 2 weeks prior to the earthquakes, many meteorites were seen brightly directly over Lisbon, Portugal. 1. Uncommon sense. 2. The antediluvian world. 3. Great disasters. 4. The complete story of the San Francisco horror. 5. The story of philosophy. 6. The lost treasure of King Juba. 8. Book of the Damned. 1758 AD, 56:52 AM. Britain's new Secretary of State, William Pitt, implemented a policy of total war against the French in India, Africa, the West Indies and America, as well as on the high seas. He assembled a 50,000-man army to attack the French forts. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1759 AD, 56:53 AM. With 200 ships, the British land 10,000 troops at the foot of the steep cliffs of Quebec City in Canada, which fell to the British in the war between England and France. Astronomers report seeing a huge planetary-sized object passing through the inner solar system. Also, Halley's Comet appeared. It was a bright apparition and it renewed scientific interest in comets. The only known appearances of Halley's Comet were in 1456, 1531, 1607, 1682, 1759, 1835, 1910 and 1986. The 1531 appearance may not have been Halley's, as the actual timing calls for a 1532 appearance, and indeed in 1532 a comet was reported, though astronomers fixed the apparition at 1531. The comet's orbit is 72 degrees inclined to the ecliptic, moving in a retrograde orbit. Like planets Phoenix and Nibiru, this steep incline hints that all three orbit along the ecliptic of a dark star, a sister star that has collapsed but is still gravitationally locked to Sol. In this year, Frederick Norden Lewis surveyed the Giza site at Egypt in his study of the Great Pyramid, noting the abundant seashells and petrified oysters around the monument. The Great Pyramid and Egyptian Delta were underwater for 340 years. Seashells have been found all the way to the base of the Great Pyramid. Lewis also found evidence that the Sphinx at one time had been painted, that elaborate wings were painted along its flanks. This supports the archaic notion that the Sphinx was an image of the biblical tetramorph, the divine cherubim angels with the features of a bull, lion, eagle, and man, like the four quadrants of the heavenly zodiac. An earthquake destroys Roman architecture at Baalbek in Lebanon. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 2. Secret Places of the Lion. 3. The Secret in the Bible. 1760 AD, 56:54 AM. Montreal in Canada fell to the British. Mayer Amschel Bauer begins his banking career in Germany and changes his name to Mayer Amschel Rothschild. No figure, real or imagined, since the time of Jesus, has ever affected the course of human events more than Mayer Amschel Rothschild. But unlike Christ, this man's legacy would see humanity into the darkest times of human tragedy. The Rothschilds would fund entire nations to make war against one another through extensive international banking loans. Both sides of each conflict funded by the same family, the Rothschilds. George III becomes King of England. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 2. The Synagogue of Satan. 1762 AD, 56:56 AM. Catherine the Great of Russia forbids all Jews from living in the country, but many ignored the edict and it was not enforced. A Parliament of France ordered the expulsion of all the Jesuits due to their moral character, espionage and insurgent activities. Astronomers report the appearance of numerous black objects passing between Earth and the Sun. These are again seen in 1763 and 1764. This is the 7,000th year of the Anunnaki chronology, exactly 4,000 years after the Great Flood. 1. March of the Titans. 2. Popery, Fall of the Church. 3. Cataclysm. 1763 AD, 56:57 AM. Astronomers view the passage of asteroids in strewn fields, passing between Earth and the Sun. By this date, 15 to 20% of all Americans in the colonies were African origin, those free and slave, a larger per capita black population than in relatively modern America. 1. Cataclysm. 2. A Patriot's History of the United States. Note: an Indian uprising along the Canadian border known as Pontiac's Rebellion occurred. Pontiac organised the assault and capture of many forts. The English regrouped and defeated Pontiac's coalition. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1764 AD, 56:58 AM. Astronomers report that numerous black objects passed between Earth and the Sun. Planet Phoenix passed between Earth and the Sun in partial transit. Described by witnesses who saw it cover 1/5 of the Sun's surface. Astronomer Hoffman studied the gigantic planet by telescope and noted that it travelled on a north to south trajectory, passing over the ecliptic plane. This is the first modern scientific evidence for the existence of the planet Phoenix, which was so feared and studied by the ancients, as detailed extensively in Chronicon 1. Phoenix continues on its 138 years orbital journey, perpendicular to the ecliptic where all the other planets, excepting Nibiru, travel around the Sun. Phoenix initiated the Great Flood in 2239 BC, 29 orbits earlier, then darkened the Sun and caused earthquakes in 1687 BC, ending the Old Bronze Age when Jacob's sons defeated the local Amorites and their Canaanite vassals after the rape of Dinah. Phoenix then passed through several times during epochal years of Israelite history, and this appearance of Phoenix in 1764 is no different, as the descendants of the 13 tribes of Israel are now amassing in the new Israel, North America, another last days land of milk and honey. The 13 tribes have become major European nations, and their most western extension is in the form of 13 English colonies. Britain passes the Currency Act in this year to stop the 13 colonies from printing their own money, colonial script, forcing colonists to accept notes from the Bank of England, thus paying interest. This act caused a depression and widespread unemployment, catapulting the colonies into the American Revolution. Interestingly, as Phoenix appeared throughout antiquity, in the same year of its visitations, empires and nations fell from power and new dynasties emerged. The taxation without representation was the pretext for the war, but the real reason for the revolt was that the colonies were livid at having to borrow money from the Bank of England, thus creating inflation. The colonial tax measures also went into effect, and the Sugar Act, which also placed duties on lumber, food, rum and molasses. The revolution was fueled by the Masons, this year of 1764 being a Masonic milestone. The strict observance lodges of Masonry were adopted in Germany, this being the Scottish Rite system. Historians agree that by 1764, the colonists had adopted a strong feeling of independence from both England and Europe, and the British policies only served to alienate them further. In 1764, Johann Joachim Winckelmann published his History of Ancient Art, which detailed the then secret excavations ongoing at the Italian sites of Herculaneum and Pompeii that were buried by Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Much of the works and relics at these sites have been withheld from public view due to their explicitly sexual tones and characteristics. Interestingly, in 1687 BC, the volcanism caused by the near transit of planet Phoenix buried cities even deeper than Pompeii and Herculaneum, cities buried alive that were only recently discovered. Nathaniel Davidson explored the interior of the Great Pyramid and chamber above the King's Chamber, and discovered at the ceiling of the Grand Gallery a tunnel that led into the relieving chamber above the King's Chamber. Davidson wrote 1764 on the Great Pyramid upon a stone at the right of the entrance. Also in 1764, the Jesuits were expelled from most of the European kingdoms for their political manipulations and conspiracies. The famous invention, the spinning jenny, was invented by James Hargreaves. In 1764, the first nebula in deep space was documented by Charles Messier, called M17. 1. Cataclysm. 2. Rule by secrecy. 3. Gods of Eden Bramley. 5. A Patriot's History of the United States. 6. The Discoverers. 7. The Secret of the Great Pyramid. 8. The Great Pyramids, Cortegiani. 9. Human Accomplishment. 10. Smithsonian, Feb 2011. 1765 AD, 56:59 AM. Britain passed the Stamp Act to pay for British troops stationed in the American colonies. It would be replaced in the following year as Britain grows worried over colonial hostilities. 1768 AD, 56:62 AM. A very prominent year in calendrics for Europe. A meteor burned across the sky of North America, clearly visible to all, visible for a full 20 seconds. The Shawnee called it Panther Passing Across, and they knew that the Great Spirit wanted this to be the name of a child that was born on that night when the meteor was seen. History records this Indian's name as Tecumseh, a man who would become a mighty warrior and leader of several Native American peoples in their territorial struggle against the colonial Europeans, who were rapidly expanding their own holdings. Tecumseh would die by treachery of his own brother, who was called the Prophet. 1. A Sorrow in Our Heart. 1769 AD, 56:63 AM. The Royal Society of London sent out scientists aboard ships to points all over the world to view the transit of Venus through their telescopes. First recorded by scientists in 1639. Venus appeared as a tiny dot against the background of the solar disk. The Spanish in California recorded an earthquake at Santa Ana. 1. The Age of Monarchs. 2. The Complete Story of the San Francisco Horror. 1770 AD, 5664 AM. Comet Lexell passed within 1.39 million miles of Earth, the closest pass of a comet in known historical times. The Sun is 93 million miles away and the Moon an average of 238,000 miles away. This same comet passed close to Jupiter, fragmented, and is seen no more. In this same year, a gigantic asteroid comet passed through the inner system on a 92 years orbit, journeying toward a collision with North America in 2046 AD. Contentions between Boston rope makers and British redcoats quartered in the city led to the Boston Massacre. Though it was not exactly a full-fledged massacre, the event spread through the colonies involving hostility and outrage against England, paving the way for the War of Independence. Britain by this time had agreed to lift many of the duties and taxes imposed on the colonials, but secretive groups like the Sons of Liberty and Masons deliberately sabotaged relations between Britain and the American colonies. The will to break away from England was already strong. Also in 1770, Mayer Amschel Rothschild drafted up the documents for the publication of the Illuminati program, only for select members, and entrusted these materials into the care of Adam Weishaupt. Rothschild is indirectly connected to the Illuminati conspiracy for one world government by a select body of men, rather than any national government, Rothschild's brainchild that he financed. 1. End of Eden. 2. Cataclysm. 3. Synagogue of Satan. 1772 AD, 5666 AM. A comet was seen and recorded by Montaigne and Messier, later named Biela, which travels an elliptical path and orbits in 6.75 years. It would be seen in 1805, 1826, 1832 and 1842 when it fragmented. Johann Bode popularised the Titius-Bode law of planetary distances from the surface of the Sun, which provided astronomers a frame of reference by which they could search the heavens for more planets belonging to the solar system. This search for more planetary bodies would lead to the 1801 discovery of the asteroid belt between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. In the American colonies, John Adams' brother named Samuel Adams founded the Committee of Correspondence, a network that connected writers in the colonies who were driven with the agenda of breaking away from Britain, publishing a storm of letters, tracts and editorials. Through the intercolonial press, the colonies became more and more American and less British. Russia sets the pale of settlement, forcing the Jews to relocate back to the countries they had originally been in before moving to Russia. Jewish infiltration of Russian society and government through financial practices had led to a series of clashes, and the Russian government sought to end this by ridding themselves of the foreign elements, the Jews. 1. Introduction to Comets. 2. The Patriots' History of the United States. 1773 AD, 5667 AM. American colonials staged the Boston Tea Party. This was explained away as a protest against the British tea tax, throwing away 342 chests of tea into the harbour. But the event was calculated to ensure that Britain would respond harshly. War was already sought, and now the colonials were searching for pretext. The writings of Samuel Adams popularised the protest, and this led to a stronger spirit of oneness among the colonials. 9 days later, 700 chests of tea were dumped at Delaware, but this was barely noticed. The torch of rebelliousness had already been lit. Britain established the stock exchange, and English Captain James Cook made the first recorded landing at Antarctica. The monarchical families of Europe launched attacks against the papacy due to the meddling of the Jesuits in political affairs, and on July 21st the Pope ended the Jesuit order. James Bruce, a Scotsman, ventured into Africa and discovered among the Ethiopian Christians who claim Hebrew descent, through King Menelik I, son of the Queen of Sheba, and Solomon Jedediah, a lost copy of the Book of Enoch. As with the early Christian movement, the Book of Enoch was originally a part of the canon. Interestingly, the ancient book declares that it would be discovered in the last days and translated into the known languages of the world. Indeed, this has occurred. In this year, the ancient ruins of the city of Palenque were discovered. At one time, this had been a Mayan metropolis. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 2. The Mayan Prophecies for 2012. 1774 AD, 5668 AM. The British passed the Intolerable Acts, as they were called by the colonials. The British besieged Boston, invading the city and closing the harbour. Martial law is declared in Boston and British troops are forcefully quartered in the homes of the colonials. The Americans throughout all the colonies are enraged, and the seeds of rebellion grow throughout the population, as supplies and food are secretly smuggled into Boston to help the colonials. The First Continental Congress elects George Washington as its head. 1775 AD, 5669 AM. As the British troops begin advancing to destroy the colonial arsenals, militia, Paul Revere and William Dawes rode by horseback to alert the Patriots in the towns which the Redcoats were travelling through. This famous nighttime ride was on April 18th, the 108th day of the year. The Continental Congress established Semper Fi, a group of fighting men aboard all naval vessels, who are now known as the US Marine Corps. It is now believed that the famous name Paul Revere was an invention of Longfellow, and that the man's real name was Dr. Samuel Prescott. 1. The World's All Wrong. 1776 AD, 5670 AM. One of the most fascinating years in the Anno Domini calendrix. On May the 1st, the Illuminati is officially begun, a wide-scale plan for a cabal of international bankers to divide and conquer the European and, by extension, the world's countries by financing both sides of major conflicts and wars that they themselves would influence and profit from, growing rich off the interest from opposing fronts. Mayer Amschel Rothschild has control of the Illuminati through Adam Weishaupt. Weishaupt publicised the beginning of the Bavarian Illuminati in this year, a premeditated shallow facade of the true order of the Illumined Ones. He was a professor of canon law at Ingolstadt University in Germany, as well as a Jesuit priest who believed in the return of Luciferian society. His chapter was specifically started with the deceptive intent to have it publicly destroyed to distract the public into believing that the order itself was no more. The Illuminati structure is based off of 13 royal families, who all trace their lineages back several centuries. Families that have taken an oath for the Antichrist to sit on his throne. George Washington, a leading Mason in the American colonies, publicly warned the new Americans about the existence of Illuminati agents of this subversive movement later, when he is made President of the United States. Though the American Revolutionary War began a year earlier, the Founding Fathers of the United States signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, officially creating the United States of America. The 13 colonies united together in war, becoming 13 states of the most powerful nation this world has ever experienced. The British General Howe attacked New York City with more than 30,000 troops with German auxiliaries on July the 2nd, capturing Long Island and driving away George Washington's tired and underfed army. The British deserter John Paul Jones captained the very first American warship, the Alfred, flying the Grand Union flag. After attacking Nassau, he was appointed over the Providence in May, and he joined the official Continental Navy, destroying British fisheries in Nova Scotia and capturing 16 British prize ships, including the British whaler Britannia. Several heavy warships fell to the famous John Paul Jones. The nations of Europe were in awe of the news passing over the Atlantic from North America. George Washington literally stalemated the most powerful army in the modern world, with an unprofessional army who lacked necessary winter gear, clothes, were always short of food and ammunition, and were held together more by a strong belief rather than a pressing need. H.G. Wells wrote, quote, "The growth of the United States is a progress that has no precedent in the world's history. It is a new kind of occurrence. Such a community could not have come into existence before. This great community of the United States is an altogether new thing in history. There have been great empires before with populations exceeding 100 million, but these were associations of divergent peoples. There has never been one single people on this scale before, unquote. By the year's end, the Continental Congress had commissioned 13,000 privateers, many formerly pirates, to harass and attack all British shipping. With these 175 ships and about 2,000 cannons, the privateers succeeded in sinking or capturing 559 English vessels, the confiscated goods sent to George Washington's army. There are two fundamental characteristics about the people who founded the United States. They were Anglo-Saxons, or more properly described, they were Anglo-Celtic. These were a people of Germanic, Celtic and Gallic stock, and they were a people unified in their faith, a belief in a future resurrection, in a Saviour, in divine redemption obtainable through belief, and a modification of personal behaviour. This Christianity that led to the founding of the United States was in fact a very revival of ancient Israelite faith. Europe was peopled by waves of migrations from the Baltic and Mediterranean that are shown clearly in Chronicon 1 to have all come from Samaria, the capital of ancient Israel in Lower Syria, which was also the origin of Christianity in Galilee. In the 7th and 6th centuries BC, these Israelite migrants were known to the other nations of the Near East and Aegean by their city of origin, Samaria, for they were universally known as Cimmerians. The culture that founded the United States was a spiritual people, the Bible being found in nearly every cottage and house in the 13 colonies. Throughout the colonies, Benjamin Franklin's 13 virtues were widely popularised and aspired to by the youth of the new nation. It was the dream of Thomas Jefferson and other founders of the nation to establish an Anglo-Saxon Renaissance. It was these men who discovered that the long history of Anglo-Saxon common law was remarkably similar to those of the ancient Israelites. The original seal of the United States was to depict on one side the Israelites following God's pillar of fire out of Egypt, and on the obverse were to be depicted the Anglo-Saxon leaders Hengist and Horsa. These men were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin. The American Revolution was in all respects also a Christian revolution. The timing of the start of the United States links it with ancient Israel's start of migration. Israel was predicted to depart from the land and travel across the earth. In the Old Testament we find that Israel would be, quote, a nation and a company of nations, that Abraham's seed shall be as numerous as the sands of the sea, and shall spread across to the west, and to the east, to the north, and to the south. Isaiah the prophet wrote that the outcasts of Israel would be spread across the face of the earth, as would be the dispersed of Judah. This distinguishing the Israelites from the Jews. Isaiah said that the Israelites would be scattered to the ends of the earth, and that in this way God would increase the people. Zechariah wrote that the descendants of Israelites would remember God in far countries. The psalmist wrote that Israel was to receive the uttermost parts of the earth for a possession. Even the apostles in the New Testament books addressed their letters to Israelites who were scattered abroad. It was prophesied that in the course of their migrations the Israelites would forget who they were. Isaiah wrote, quote, for the Lord hath poured out upon you the spirit of deep sleep, and hath closed your eyes. I will bring the blind by a way they know not. I will lead them on paths they have not known. Unquote. The book of Romans declares that blindness in part has happened to Israel. The tribe of adoption was Joseph's, carried through the blessings of Jacob to his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. These two patriarchs were prophesied to have descendants that would establish the mightiest Israelite empires this world would ever know. And these were the British Empire, Manasseh, and the United States, Ephraim. Manasseh means forgetful, and Ephraim means doubly fruitful. The Old Testament prophets declared that the Israelites would migrate to the ends of the earth, to the isles that are afar off, and to the island and coast to the far north and to the west, even to the ends of the earth. The United States as Ephraim was prophesied by Moses, quote, his glory is like the firstling calf of his bullock, and his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth, unquote. In the mindset of antiquity, the ends of the earth is where the sun set, and when the biblical authors make this statement, they are always referring to the West. The unicorn is one of the primary heraldic motifs of Great Britain or England. the land of the Angles. The old Hebrew word for calf, firstling, was Engel. The unicorn was the ancient crest of the kings of Israel. The Americans inherited a vast continental land that was only sparsely populated with warring tribes of Indians. The American expansion into the West also is without historical precedent, for the Anglo-Celts led the march but were quickly followed by millions of other Europeans, also all descended from the 13 tribes of Israel. In the year 745 BC, the 10 tribes were forcibly deported out of Israel by the Assyrians, an event well documented in biblical and secular history and verified extensively in the archaeological records as shown in Chronicon 1. 745 BC began the Israelite migrations and the fulfillment of hundreds of biblical prophecies, beginning a 25-20-year countdown, or 360 times 7 years, to the birth of the United States of America in 1776 AD. The sum of 2520 is prominent in Hebrew prophetic literature. The Puritans landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620 AD, exactly 156 years prior, or 144 times 13 months before 1776. The 13 colonies shadow the 13 tribes of Israel, but are themselves in North America foreshadowed by the 13 clans of the Maya who came from North America. The United States was founded 1300 years after the fall of Rome in 476 AD, which fell to the German ancestors of the Anglo-Saxons, the forefathers of the English. The USA adopted Latin as the language of the courts, the scientific and medical vernaculars, and even copied much of its system of government in the form of republicanism. It is not coincidence but providence that in 1776, Edward Gibbon, the famed English historian, published his epic Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, a masterpiece of literature and history unrivalled today in several volumes. Of further significance is that Adam Smith, in this same year of 1776, published his Wealth of Nations, long considered the Bible of international commerce, a text that taught the governments of the world the benefits of commercialism and capitalism in international trade. Lastly, the Great Seal of the United States would soon be designed and be that of the Great Pyramid of Egypt, which stands at a geometrical height of 5814 pyramid inches. The actual height is 5448 inches, however. Once the chief cornerstone is placed upon the flat apex of the structure, the intended height is 5814. By intended is meant fulfilled. The year 1776 is precisely 5814 years of the orbital chronology begun in 4039 BC, when our planet adopted its present orbit around the Sun and Homo sapiens sapiens was directly created by the Anunnaki, see Chronicon 1. 1776 AD is also 4590 Anno Pyramid, 4590 years after the completion of the Great Pyramid in 2815 BC, 1080 AM, 4590 being 153 times 30. The sum of 153 in biblical gematria means sons of God, and the New Testament records associate it with Christianity. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 2. Behold a pale horse. 3. Phenomenal world. 4. Uncommon sense. 5. A Patriot's History of the United States. 6. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet. 7. A Short History of the World. 9. Celtic Myths and Legends. 12. The 5,000-Year Leap. 14. Tracing Our Ancestors. 15. The Lost Language of Symbolism. 16. Human Accomplishment. 1777 AD, 5671 AM. A French astronomer reported black unknown objects passing over the face of the sun. As the British advanced upon Philadelphia, the local patriots relocated the Liberty Bell and concealed it until the British departed. 1. Cataclysm. 1778 AD, 5672 AM. Captain John Paul Jones sailed to France, then to Scotland and England in the Ranger, capturing a British warship named Drake off the coast of Ireland. Flying the American flag, this was the first time a foreign government recognised the Stars and Stripes. France now entered the American War of Independence, aiding the colonies against Britain. The French Navy under Admiral Joseph de Grasse won a great naval battle against the British at Sandy Hook, one of the very few French naval victories over England. The United States adopts as its Great Seal the Great Pyramid and Eye icon, first depicted upon a $50 colonial note. Also on the Great Seal was the depiction of the phoenix, the choice of Benjamin Franklin, who believed that the eagle was a bad choice, a bird unclean and of evil disposition. So prominent was the phoenix ideal in early American minds, that the very first American steamship put to sea was the vessel called Phoenix from Hoboken, New York to Philadelphia, right after the turn of the 19th century. The French mourn the death of François-Marie Arouet, better known to all as Voltaire. In the Jewish chronology that holds as its year 1 the year 3671 BC, this year was 5448, paralleling the present height of the Great Pyramid in pyramid inches, as demonstrated in many books on the subject. 1. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet. 2. A Patriot's History of the United States. 3. A Short History of the World. 1779 AD, 5673 AM. Spain entered the American war against Britain as an ally of France, in the hope of gaining back some of their colonial holdings abroad. By 1780, Spain and France had put over 120 warships into action for the American cause. John Paul Jones captured 17 British merchantmen and happened upon a convoy of vessels guarded by the HMS Serapis and the Countess of Scarborough while he sailed the Poor Richard. Jones exchanged fire with 2 warships and won. The British captain had called out to Jones, and John Paul Jones answered in what became the famous American war slogan, "I have not yet begun to fight." 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 2. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet. 1780 AD, 5674 AM. Tired of British abuses at sea, and still angry at losing New Amsterdam to the British, now called New York, the Dutch of Holland joined Denmark, Sweden, Portugal and Russia in the League of Armed Neutrality, an agreement to fire on British ships rather than allowing them to board. Previously, because of British naval superiority, European nations submitted to the practice of boarding. In A Patriot's History of the United States, L. Schweikart and M. Allen wrote, quote, "In an amazing display of diplomatic ineptitude, Britain had managed to unite all of the major navies of the world against its quest to blockade a group of colonies that lacked a navy of their own." Unquote. This was exactly 50 jubilees, 2,500 years, after the last of the 10 tribes of Israel were forcibly deported out of the land and into Assyria and its frontiers. When looked at over the course of millennia, the entire American Revolutionary War was in essence an Israelite civil war, with its youngest tribe emerging powerfully on the world scene. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1781 AD, 5675 AM. William Herschel of Germany moved to England and designed his own telescope, with which he discovered the planet Uranus. He went on to discover nebulae as being far distant bodies, double star systems, and postulated many astronomical theories that have now been proven fact. 1. God's Laughter. 1782 AD, 5676 AM. The Great Seal of the United States, as designed by George Washington, was of the phoenix under 13 stars, in the form of the Star of David, with an olive branch and 13 arrows. This was redesigned by William Barton, a phoenix in flames on one side, with the Great Pyramid and Eye on the other. It will not be changed for 120 years. In 1902 AD, the exact year planet Phoenix passes through the inner solar system and bathes the entire world in a blanket of cosmic dust. The olive branch and the 13 arrows are ancient Israelite symbols. At this time, the people of the infant United States believed that the birth of their new nation in North America was by divine inspiration. 2 particular passages in the Old Testament were believed to refer directly to themselves. Jeremiah 16:13 reads, quote, "I will cast you out of this land into a land that thou knowest not, neither ye nor your fathers." Unquote. Also Deuteronomy 7:6, which reads, quote, "For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. Unquote. In 1782 was the last known public execution of a witch in Switzerland. 1. The secret teachings of all ages. 2. Romans 11:24. America and Great Britain, our identity. 1783 AD, 5677 AM. After 7 years of intense fighting, the American Revolutionary War of the 13 States against Britain is over, with the Treaty of Paris after American and French forces laid siege to Yorktown, compelling British General Cornwallis to surrender. The fight for independence began in 1775. A truly unique situation for the United States was a nation before it secured the right to exist by war. Also in this year, an earthquake in Calabria, Italy, killed 30,000 people. The Icelandic volcano Laki erupted, as did the Japanese volcano Asama, and together the two volcanoes filled the upper atmosphere with enough ash to cause 3 very cold winters. The astronomer Herschel noted fiery explosions on the surface of the moon, denoting volcanic activity. 1. Book of the Damned. 1784 AD, 5678 AM. Adam Weishaupt employs the same strategy used by Mayer Amschel Rothschild. He gets another man named Xavier Zwack between himself and the Illuminati conspiracy. Zwack possesses a book containing the elaborate plans of Weishaupt on the planned French Revolution. The book is intercepted by Bavarian authorities when the courier is struck by lightning on his way to Paris. The Bavarian police raid Weishaupt's lodges and the homes of influential associates. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 1785 AD, 5679 AM. The Bavarian government outlawed the Illuminati and the order went underground. Having captured proof of an Illuminati conspiracy, the Bavarians began investigating all possible leads on members, not realizing that they had been deceived. The leads they had resulted in little, and the publicising of the order's activities actually aided it in becoming more invisible. On May 12th, the Royal Society in London was notified that miners blasting rocks at the Strait of Gibraltar to raise military batteries about 50 feet above sea level accidentally happened upon a human body fossil that measured 8.5 feet in length. To their amazement, the human was petrified in the rock, with perfect features of flesh. Even his veins were perfectly preserved. Trapped in the same marble was a seashell. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 2. Secret cities of old South America. 1786 AD, 5680 AM. The Bavarian government publishes the details of the plot of the Illuminati to initiate the French Revolution, as well as international designs to control the world through banking cartels. All ideas originally fomented by Mayer Amschel Rothschild, a Jewish banker. Copies of the report are sent to the heads of state throughout Europe and the USA, but the order was already too entrenched and financed through the banks. The warnings about the Illuminati and their plans were thus downplayed. Agents of the Illuminati already in strategic positions around the world. The seriousness of the conspiracy was hardly regarded. The first major plan of the Illuminati was to cause the French Revolution, which indeed occurred as scheduled in 1789. 1. The Great Conspiracy, Gordon Moore. 1787 AD, 5681 AM. The United States holds its first constitutional convention in Philadelphia, setting up a federal government. This year marked the last official burning of a heretic by the Inquisition. The Elector of Bavaria has the castle of Sanderdorf searched, and important Illuminati documents are found. In Siberia was discovered the perfect frozen remains of a woolly mammoth which caused a stir in the scientific community. 1. Proof of the Illuminati. 1788 AD, 5682 AM. The first Federal Congress of the United States was held in New York. The Constitutional Convention completed its work on the amazing and world-famous United States Constitution. In finalizing the US Constitution, James Madison considered it a miracle. He said, quote, "It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in the convention a finger of the almighty hand, unquote. On April 30th, 1788, George Washington became the first President of the United States. Astronomer Schroeter witnessed lights appearing on the surface of the moon in the lunar mountains. When sunlight appeared in that region, there was seen a shadow cast from that area where the lights had been seen in the dark, believed to have been volcanoes. Because of political jealousy, John Paul Jones leaves North America and is appointed Rear Admiral of the Russian Navy by Empress Catherine II the Great. 1. March of the Titans. 2. A Patriot's History of the United States. 4. Book of the Damned. 5. Pirates and the Lost Templar Fleet. 1789 AD, 5683 AM. On the western side of the Atlantic Ocean, the United States Constitution becomes effective 13 years after the Declaration of Independence. On the eastern side of the Atlantic, the French Revolution begins with the storming of the Bastille in Paris, a monumental prison, the revolution lasting until 1798 AD. Behind the scenes, the major pushers and financiers of the revolution were Jews. 1790 AD, 5684 AM. The Aztec stone of the fifth sun was discovered beneath tons of earth in a canal at the archaic ruins of the city of Tenochtitlan near Mexico City. This was an ancient American version of the last days apocalypse involving comets, quakes and flooding. May of this year is 3,000 months to the global disaster in 2040 AD as Phoenix transits. The United States holds its first census, discovering that over 90% of the people were Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, and of related Teutonic descent. The first federal naturalization laws required that citizens of the USA be free white persons. 1. Atlantis in America. 1791 AD, 5685 AM. French soldiers removed the remains of the prophet Nostradamus to the church in St. Laurent. From his birth in 1503 to the exhumations of the remains this year was 288 years, 144 plus 144. In Russia, Catherine the Great forced all Jews to be resettled to the west of the country in the Pale of Settlement. This was 126 years before the complete takeover of Russia by the international Jews known as the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. 1. March of the Titans. 1792 AD, 5686 AM. The French founded the Republic of France, this being exactly 1296 years, 432 times 3, after 496 AD, when Clovis I converted to Christianity and the Franks were declared a Christian people. Mount Unzen in Japan erupts, killing 14,500 people. In this year, the cornerstone to the White House in Washington is laid, and the US Mint is established. 1794 AD, 5688 AM. Mount Vesuvius in Italy erupted. Stones rained from the sky over Tuscany. Historians have connected the two events despite the known fact that Vesuvius's eruption was not powerful enough to launch stone debris into the atmosphere to rain down on Tuscany. As seen in Chronicon 1, the falling of stones from the sky, even on a clear day, had been recorded many times. Erasmus Darwin released his Zoonomia or the Laws of Organic Life, proposing a general concept of biological evolution, 65 years before Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859. Ernst Chladni and Heinrich Olbers of Germany defend the controversial notion that meteorites were of extraterrestrial origin, offering a scientific explanation. 1. Book of the Damned. 2. Breaking the God Spell. 3. Human Accomplishment. 1797 AD, 5691 AM. An earthquake at Quito, Ecuador killed 41,000 people. 1798 AD, 5692 AM. Napoleon Bonaparte, a Corsican, led 70,000 French troops into Egypt and defeated the Turks at the Battle of the Pyramids, which was not really fought in the vicinity of the pyramids at all. Napoleon's train included many scientists. A mathematician with the French surveyors studying the ruins in Egypt measured the Great Pyramid's dimensions and concluded that there was enough stonework to build a wall 9 foot high around the whole of France. Napoleon said, quote, I feel myself driven towards an end that I do not know. As soon as I shall have reached it, and as soon as I shall become unnecessary, an atom will suffice to shatter me. Till then, not all the forces of mankind can do anything against me." Unquote. As the Jews were avid supporters of the French Revolution, Napoleon did not trust them. In fact, Napoleon remarked that the Jews are the master robbers of the modern age. He said, quote, "We ought to ban the Jews from commerce because they abuse it." Unquote. Napoleon's general Berthier captured the Pope of Rome and sent him in chains to France, where he later died. Many hold that this was prophesied in the scriptures, for this was 1260 years exactly after 538 AD, when the Pope was declared supreme over all Christendom by the Emperor Justinian. The beast received its deadly wound. Also in this year, John Robinson, a professor and high-degree Mason of the Scottish Rite, published his book entitled, quote, "Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of the Freemasons, Illuminati and Reading Societies." Unquote. He was a professor of the prestigious Edinburgh University, who in 1783 had been elected General Secretary of the Royal Society. He disclosed data given to him personally by Adam Weishaupt. 1. The decline of the West. 2. March of the Titans. 3. Jewish supremacism. 4. Synagogue of Satan. 1799 AD, 5693 AM. Napoleon Bonaparte becomes the first consul of France. In Egypt, the French scientists excavated many ancient Egyptian sites. The French scholar François Jomard measured the Great Pyramid at a height of 144 metres, 481 feet high. On August 12th, Napoleon stayed alone in the king's chamber, and later emerged looking pale and haggard. He did not explain what he experienced, though his associates claimed that something indeed transpired inside the structure. Napoleon asserted on his deathbed that no one would ever believe him if he told the truth about his experience. Napoleon's archaeologists discovered the famous Rosetta Stone, a trilingual inscription monument written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, Demotic script and Greek, that would later prove to be the key to deciphering the elusive hieroglyphs. The Rosetta Stone was made in 196 BC by Ptolemy V, called Epiphanes. Alessandro Volta invented the modern battery. In this year, George Washington died on Mount Vernon, and the entire nation of the United States mourned the passing of this living legend. 1. Pyramid Quest. 2. Historical Deception. 1800 AD, 5694 AM. The federal government of the United States moved to Washington, D.C. The Library of Congress was founded. On October the 11th, 6 earthquake shocks occurred in California. As North America is the last days land of promise, the new Israel filled with the blood of descendants of the migrating Israelites, this year of 1800 AD was precisely 2520 years, 360 times 7, after the last of the 10 tribes of Israel were deported by the Assyrians in 721 BC. This North American start for the centre of authority was 1,000 years after the European centre of authority over the Israelite descendants began in 800 AD with Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire. 1. The complete story of the San Francisco Horror. 1801 AD, 5695 AM. The ports of the Mediterranean and Europe were now seeing a lot of merchant vessels from the United States. For decades, the piracy had increased in the Mediterranean, known as the Barbary Coast Pirates, who ruled from Tripoli. The United States embarks on the Tripolitan War against Libya to end the piracy of American ships. Astronomers looking for another planet in the empty region between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, as predicted by the Titius-Bode law of planetary distances, instead find the asteroid belt, long thought to be the remains of an extinct planet. G. Piazzi of Palermo, Sicily, discovered the asteroid Ceres on January 1st. French engineer and archaeologist Edme François Jomard and astronomer N.A. Nouet counted 203 as the number of courses in the Great Pyramid's masonry. This is correct, for the 204th piece of the monument is missing, known as the chief cornerstone, the structure being a lithic prophecy of the return of God to earth in 2106. This saviour in the prophetic texts named the chief cornerstone. 1. Introduction to comets. 2. The Great Pyramids, Cortegiani. 1802 AD, 5696 AM. The asteroid Pallas was discovered. Heinrich Olbers of Germany argued that asteroids are fragments of an exploded planet. 1. Introduction to comets. 2. Human accomplishment. 1803 AD, 5697 AM. Napoleon of France sold the French territories of North America, west of the United States, to the newborn nation. Known as the Louisiana Purchase, the increase in territory doubled the geographical boundaries of the United States. This move fulfilled an eschatological type found in the biblical records. The firstborn of Jacob was Reuben, who was unstable as water, though strong. The birthright nation should have been France, from the Franks, the people of Charlemagne, the first people to establish a European empire after the fall of Rome. But Reuben lost the birthright, and in the book of Jasher and Genesis we learn that the birthright passed to the last-born, in fact the sons of Joseph, son of Jacob in Egypt. Manasseh and Ephraim were adopted by Jacob, and Ephraim was prophesied as the greater. Indeed, Ephraim, United States, was doubly fruitful. Soon all of the nations of Europe would have whole communities migrating to the United States to fill up these lands. A land rich in resources, the acquisition of the Louisiana Purchase was nothing short of the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. 1804 AD, 5698 AM. Napoleon Bonaparte made himself Emperor of all Europe, subduing most of Italy and Spain, defeating Austria and Prussia, and domineering over all of Europe west of Russia. The asteroid Juno was discovered. 1. Introduction to comets. 1805 AD, 5699 AM. The British Army defeated Napoleon's forces in the Battle of Trafalgar, halting French expansionism. The Pasha of Tripoli released the American prisoners, the United States winning the Tripolitan War, but the conflict would not truly end until 1815. Comet Biela was seen by astronomer Pons. 1. Introduction to comets. 1806 AD, 5700 AM. Napoleon refused to acknowledge a German Holy Roman Empire. He divided Germany into states under the Confederation of the Rhine under French jurisdiction. 1807 AD, 5701 AM. The asteroid Vesta was discovered. A comet was studied by astronomer William Herschel, who wrote that the stars dimmed by the tail of comets. 1. Introduction to comets. 1808 AD, 5702 AM. The United States outlaws the importation of slaves. This virtually ended the African slave trade. On May 16th, a procession of meteorites passed overhead for 2 hours, some falling to the ground where it was discovered that they were composed of some alien gelatinous substance. This was 666 plus 666, 1332 years after the fall of Rome in 476 AD. 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 2. Book of the Damned. 1811 AD, 5705 AM. The New Madrid earthquakes rocked the United States in a series of the most widespread and powerful earthquakes on record. The epicenter was located at New Madrid on the Mississippi River in Missouri. Quake shocks were felt as far as New York and Florida, with church bells ringing of themselves in Virginia. The quakes occurred in late 1811 after the appearance of the Great Comet. At one point, the Mississippi River was observed to flow backwards, and in Kentucky, the renowned naturalist John James Audubon and others heard a roar in the sky thinking it was a tornado. They observed a darkening of the sky and then a brightening, the darkness strange and unusual. Interestingly, the ancient Egyptian number for cataclysm was 2448, as seen in Chronicon 1, which was the year of the exodus and disasters of the plagues on the Annus Mundi calendar, being 1447 BC. Counting from the first English settlement of permanence in North America, Jamestown, in 1607, past 204 years to 1811 New Madrid quakes, or 2448 months. In this same year, the charter for the Bank of the United States ran out. a charter owned by the Rothschilds. Nathan Rothschild threatens that America will be embroiled in a terrible war, even be subjected back under colonial status if the charter was not renewed. Even by this date, the House of Rothschild, begun from the Jew Mayer Amschel, already exercised power throughout Europe. 1. Introduction to Comments. 2. Synagogue of Satan. 1812 AD, 5706 AM. The War of 1812 begins between British Canada and the United States from June 18 to December 24, 1814. The people of the United States called it the Second War for American Independence. The British burned the city of Washington, D.C. and the White House. 5 weeks after the New Madrid quakes in 1811, in January 1812, another earthquake shook the eastern USA, followed by a second quake, then a third and far more destructive quake on February the 7th that was felt over 1.5 million square miles. The British war machine was from money borrowed from the Rothschilds, but their war against Napoleon greatly diminished their American war effort. Napoleon sought to invade Russia and marched 422,000 soldiers east in the greatest disaster of his illustrious career. Freezing temperatures and typhus epidemic ensured that only 10,000 men returned from the failed invasion. Another comet appeared in this year. In limestone dated at 28 million years by scientists, men on the French Caribbean coast of Guadeloupe excavated a perfectly preserved human female fossil. She stood 5 feet 2 inches tall, and her entombed body was sent to the British Museum in a 2-ton block that was displayed in England as evidence of the Great Flood. In this year, catastrophism is introduced as an explanation for the mass extinctions of the past by Georges Cuvier of France. In December 1812, a disastrous earthquake occurred in California, which at the time was only sparsely inhabited. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 2. March of the Titans. 3. Evolution Cruncher. 4. Human Accomplishment. 5. The Complete San Francisco Horror. 1814 AD, 5708 AM. During the British bombardment of Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key wrote the famous Star-Spangled Banner. The conclusion of this war demonstrated that the Americans were rapidly becoming the equals of any power in Europe, 120 being a major foundational number in calendrics. This was exactly 120 years after the Bank of England started in 1694 AD, 120 being a major foundational number in calendrics. The Bank of England was owned by the Rothschild banking dynasty, and the War of 1812 was a demonstration to the American government how easy it was that they could influence entire nations to war. Interestingly, this year was 148 years, 1776 months, after the Great Fire of London in 1666. Also in 1814, Pope Pius VII restored the Order of the Jesuits officially, though many believe the Jesuits only went underground and were never truly abolished. This was 1260 years after the imperial restoration of the Roman Empire by Justinian in 554 AD, 1. A Patriot's History of the United States. 1815 AD, 5709 AM. Napoleon's forces were opposed by the British, the Prussians and Belgians in the famous Battle of Waterloo. During this episode of European history, Amschel Rothschild is praised in international Jewry today for his brilliant defrauding of the English people. Knowing that the stock market would crash if Napoleon won, and that it would soar if the British won, Rothschild had agents on the continent and the English Channel, using carrier pigeons and signal ships. Though Rothschild received the message that the French lost and Napoleon was defeated, he deliberately sent out agents throughout London to spread the news that Napoleon was victorious and that England had lost the Battle of Waterloo. The result was predicted. The stock market plummeted and Mayor Amschel Rothschild, through his agents, bought up whole companies for pennies on the dollar in an unparalleled buying frenzy that left the English people bankrupt, whole families with centuries-old companies destitute. The next day the truth was known, that Napoleon was defeated and captured by the British, but it was too late for England. Rothschild stole the wealth of England. Napoleon is exiled to the island of Elba, where he escaped the same year and began his second conquest of France. In Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, were discovered labyrinthine tunnels wherein were found a mummified human female with finely chiselled features showing her to be young. She was fossilised. Due to continued pirate attacks on US ships in the Mediterranean, Congress declared war on Algiers and the Barbary States. A US naval fleet was sent to Algiers, Tunis and Tripoli, and peace was obtained for US merchants. 1. Jewish supremacism. 2. Secret cities of old South America. 1816 AD, 5710 AM. In the 40th year since the Declaration of Independence, the Second Bank of the United States is approved by Congress, this also owned by the Rothschilds. Many Americans are enraged by this treachery. An Anglo-Dutch fleet bombarded Algiers in retaliation for piracy. A huge spectacle was seen passing through the sky that apparently missed the earth. In April, Mount Tambora in Java, Indonesia, erupted with earthquakes, initially killing 12,000 people, the detonations being heard 1,000 miles away. Subsequent disease and starvation shortly afterward killed more people, an estimated 80,000. So much ash was thrust into the atmosphere that a dust veil darkened the sun in a thick haze, so severely that 1816 was known as the year without a summer. On September 23rd, New England suffered strange gale-force winds that wrought much devastation. Giovanni Battista Caviglia, born 1770, spent 4 years studying the Great Pyramids and Sphinx. He was a hermeticist and student of the occult, who tunnelled into the recesses above the king's chamber in search of a hidden chamber in the area the shaft from the queen's chamber ascended. How he was aware of this is not known, but later a chamber would indeed be found. 1. Synagogue of Satan. 2. Book of the Damned. 1819 AD, 5713 AM. About 2,000 square miles of dry land in India sank below the sea abruptly. The ancient 200-ton monolith known as Cleopatra's Needle, an obelisk from the Egyptian city of Memphis, crafted in 1515 BC, was given to the British by Muhammad Ali. It would be another 59 years before being relocated to London, when Thutmose III had this and another obelisk erected in 1515 BC. Both Manasseh and Ephraim were still alive in Egypt, and Egypt was full of labouring Israelites. The pedigree of the peoples of the British Isles and the United States, and by extension most of Europe, would soon be demonstrated as the very obelisks their ancestors erected in Egypt over 33 centuries earlier would be placed in the major centres of power, belonging to the last days descendants of the Israelites, London and New York. In this year, Arthur Schopenhauer wrote in his The World and Representation, quote, "Thus animals existed before men, fish before the land animals, plants before fishes, and the inorganic before the organic. Consequently, the original mass had to go through a long series of changes before the first eye could be opened," unquote. The myth that Charles Darwin was first to believe in biological evolution is clearly dissolved here. 1. The Antediluvian World. 2. Today, Tomorrow and the Great Beyond. 3. The World as Will and Representation. 1820 AD, 5714 AM. A large object is seen traversing the sky across the disk of the Sun on April 27th by astronomer Steinhebel of Vienna. Caviglia found Roman letters, blackened, upon the roof of the subterranean chamber below the Great Pyramid in Egypt. It is discovered that Antarctica, formerly believed to be only ice sheets like the North Pole counterpart, the Arctic, is actually the seventh continent buried in ice. Geologists and researchers have since found evidence of tropical flora and fauna beneath the ice sheets, confirming the evidence from old maps that there was a large landmass at the southern region of the planet prior to the ice buildup. Historians like Charles Hapgood have provided a wealth of information showing that the ancients were aware of the continent at the South Pole. 1. Book of the Damned. 2. The Great Pyramid, Smythe. 3. Atlantis in America. 1821 AD, 5715 AM. The Greeks' revolt against the Turks starting 6 years of desperate warfare. At first the European power watched with interest but did nothing to aid officially. However, many groups of young men from different nations gathered in Greece to help the Greeks against their occupying enemies. Richard Lawrence translated the ancient Ethiopic Book of Enoch into English, fulfilling the book's self-proclaimed prophecy that it would be discovered in the last days and translated into other languages. In this year, French scholar Jean-François Champollion deciphered the alien Egyptian hieroglyphics using the Rosetta Stone trilingual inscription found by Napoleon's men in Egypt. Napoleon Bonaparte died. Stephen Austin founded the first American colony in Texas, which was controlled by Mexico. One Secrets of Nostradamus. 1822 AD, 57:16 AM. An earthquake near Java in Indonesia killed 4,000 people, with volcanic eruptions lasting for 5 hours. A huge asteroid comet passed through the inner solar system on its journey to collide into North America in 2046 AD. In another area of the Pacific from Java and Indonesia at Honolulu, Hawaii, the very first well dug there yielded up a human skull and other remains underneath 8 feet of ancient coral, volcanic sand and loam. Respected astronomer Baron von Paula Gruithuisen observed with a powerful telescope what he believed to be architectural ruins of a lunar cityscape near the centre of the moon bordering Sinus Medai. 1. The antediluvian world. 2. The problem of Lemuria. 3. Elder gods in antiquity. 1823 AD, 57:17 AM. General Bolivar of South America led a revolution against Spain and the European monarchies who were determined to send military aid to suppress this insurrection to aid Spain, a holy alliance of European powers designed to keep their foreign holdings in submission. The British opposed this European intrusion and the Americans joined this opposition. President Monroe declaring formally that if any European power should attempt to extend their authority anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, the United States would regard this as an act of hostility. Known as the famous Monroe Doctrine, this American act is what led to the explosion of Central and South America republics in the following years. The whole of Europe did not want to take on a British-American alliance. The Monroe Doctrine, a protection over Americans from European intrusion, was 216 years, 108 plus 108, after the first English permanent colony was founded in North America, Jamestown, in 1607. 1824 AD, 57:18 AM. Astronomer Gruithuisen claims to have sighted colossal buildings located just north of the Schroeter crater. 1. Elder gods in antiquity. 1826 AD, 57:20 AM. Two of the most prominent American fathers, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, both died on July the 4th this year, both men having signed the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th, exactly 50 years earlier in 1776, this being a Hebrew Jubilee. This dual death occurred precisely 72 years, a precessional year, after George Washington, the most prominent of the fathers of America, surrendered Fort Necessity to the overwhelming force of English and Indians in 1754 on the day of July the 4th. The timing of these events and connections between these three great Anglo-Saxon fathers of America demonstrate the signature of the divine in the beginning of the United States of America, a nation-turned-empire unlike any that this world has ever seen. Also in this year, a Mason named Captain William Morgan made it his duty to warn the American people about the Illuminati operations occurring in the secret meetings at Mason lodges. A warning also made by President George Washington. Agents of the Illuminati tried Morgan in absentia, and he fled toward Canada. Near Niagara Falls, a Mason from England named Richard Howard killed him. The story is thoroughly documented in police reports and trial records in New York. Comet Biela was sighted in this year. 1. The Great Conspiracy, Gordon Moore. 2. Introduction to Comets.